Madness. This pleases me.
This is the best shrine, both in name, backstory, and benefit. In exchange for a levitation potion, you get a 48-minute 100-point levitation effect. 100 points is very fast, more so the higher your speed is. Levitation potions range in price, but the cheapest you can donate can be found for less than 50 gold. And in terms of location, the shrine is right next to an Almsavie intervention point in Vivec, meaning a possible navigation option for the city is to Almsavie, donate a cheap levitate potion, and fly around the city. Although it's worth noting that the actual effect time can be run down if you wait. Like, use the wait function, not sit there for an hour. Our next shrine is in the Puzzle Canal, a neglected area of the game. Despite what Vivec will say, the only hidden treasure here is the shrine. The shrine here is the Shrine of Courtesy, but it will only give the cryptic hint to breathe the water to make the way clear. When we awake, we find the room has changed. There's a new shrine, but to use it we have to give a silver longsword to a very, very bored Dremora. I brought my own, but he keeps a selection of swords on hand, presumably because he doesn't want to have to haggle with pilgrims who come unprepared and demand to speak to his manager. Sadly, despite how detailed this shrine is, its effect does not match. You get water breathing and swift swim for 48 minutes. Remember, outside this palace, in an easily accessible area, is a shrine that will give you the power of flight. And here we get a fairly weak swim bonus and water breathing. And those were the 7 graces. If it seemed easy, that is a consequence of me doing a little preparation and playing a character that's already been broken in. So we return to Tol's Valen, in Aldrune, who welcomes us as an acolyte in the temple. A common trend when working for the temple involves several quests that will have us curing people of disease. Many of these quests will emphasize the need to maintain humility. One of the quests even entails curing a Daedra worshipper in a Daedric ruin full of hostiles on the side of a cliff. This is where knowing the spell Vivec's Touch from doing the 7 graces comes in handy. Quite a few of the quest rewards are skill books, which I definitely approve of, although I think having actual training as rewards might be slightly better since literature tends to also double as a monetary reward, which is not in line with the temple's values. Also, a difference between the Xbox and PC copies of the game have to do with skill books. On the PC, you can use the inventory screen to pick up books without reading them, meaning you can stash them for later, more expensive levels. Here's my library on my latest PC playthrough of skill books I've collected from playing every faction aside from Redoran. Now is a fair point to mention the 36 Sermons of Vivec. Morrowind is full of ancillary literature like, for example, the 2920 series, which is 12 books detailing the events of the final year of the First Era. Some of my information that I've generally sourced to the UESP is itself sourced to some of this work. Most of the books are short stories with some insight into the world and culture. Not the 36 sermons. The sermons are long at 16,000 words and difficult to read in one sitting due to the various changes in prose, structure, and logic. It also conflicts heavily with actual historical accounts, which makes sense given Vivec has been playing historical revisionist for over a millennia at this point. What the books themselves are about is almost irrelevant. It's a revised story of the origin of Vivec and his relationship with Endoral Nerevar, the nature of which will be revealed in greater detail during the main quest. What is significant about the books is that they, even today, serve as the series' primary example of its foundation on the concept of the unreliable narrator. The series is an increasingly complicated web of lore and theory crafting that allows for effectively any interpretation of the setting to be correct. A good example of this would be the fate of Atmora, the original homeland of humanity. Atmora is said to have been frozen over, but what this actually means depends on the account. One account would suggest that it literally froze over. Another account suggests that the dragons, who represent corporeal time, left Atmora and the continent was subsequently frozen in time. Or perhaps the apocalypse hit and Atmora was frozen in time in the sense that no one lives there anymore, so nobody bothers to make the trip. Because the player is never able to visit Atmora themselves, it's impossible to say which interpretation is correct, and that is the point because it's a reflection of human writing as well. Michael Kirkbride wrote the 36 Sermons, but he wasn't alone with his philosophy, as Douglas Goodall is quoted as saying, Ken Rolston wrote a dozen different accounts, apparently without any personal preference to which, if any, was accurate, and ignored the contradictions. End quote. I feel that far too many people attribute Morrowind's writing to Kirkbride, which, like the sermons, isn't necessarily an accurate truth. He wrote the sermons, and while the sermons are an iconic part of Morrowind, they are not Morrowind itself. Let's get back to the temple then. An early quest I was tasked with was to deal with Elvil Vidron, who is claiming to be something called the Nerevarine. Don't worry, that name will never come up again. We are asked to convince him otherwise, but should this prove impossible, to kill him. Sure enough, he has his shirt off and is ranting in the street about the blight spreading from Red Mountain. Nothing I can say will convince him, so I kill him, and on his person is an ash statue. We're then tasked with making another pilgrimage. This time we're to go to Margan and mimic the events that occurred at the temple there. Long ago, Mayreen's Dagon, yes, that's how it was spelled, Mayreen's Dagon was gonna throw a rock at some Dunmer. The Dunmer people have had more rocks thrown at them than the dinosaurs. Anyways, Vivek taunted Dagon to throw the rock at him instead. Well, I doubt Mayrunes is in the area waiting to throw around rocks at pilgrims, given he's currently planning his invasion of Tamriel in, 7 years? So I asked the local priest for help, and he's the one to tell us to reenact this drama. I have to taunt a Dremora in the room into fighting me, he threatens to rape my corpse, I touch the giant rock, and the ritual is complete. You know, I'm really starting to find faith here. The Tribunal Temple is a very populist religion because their pilgrimages are all about physically imitating the actions of their idols. But not everybody can toil at the fields of Kumu, or slay the Drog King, or stop a meteor from starting the Red Khan year. Or in this case, get Mayrune's Dagon to focus their attention on them. Hard left, we're tasked with convincing a pilgrim, Tanusia Veloth, who's popular in the city of Vivek, of leaving town as she's contracted corpus. She's hanging out in the arena, presumably watching all my characters and all their various duels, and impressed with my battle with Bolven Venom, leaves when I ask her nicely. Fun fact, if you kill her and search her body, you contract corpus disease. It's incurable and will completely break your game as NPCs refuse to speak with you. Also, for anyone in the audience who might not already know this, you're completely capable of spreading diseases that you show no symptoms for. Do not be like Tanusia Veloth. Our next quest has us take an oath of silence and journey to the Sanctus Shrine. Let's see, we're in Vivek, which is in the south of the map here, and the shrine is, This entailed a long journey on foot as I was not able to speak to anybody, including fast travel services. Well, on foot, as in my feet were atop the air as I journeyed through the sky battling cliff racers. Yeah, that shrine that gives a 48-minute levitation effect came in real handy, but good try and an interesting quest. We do get 4 skill books as a reward, which is pretty substantial as it's maybe 4/10 of a level if those skills are in your class. We cure some people, deliver some food, lowly busybody work, and finally we're tasked with making another pilgrimage, this time to Mount Cant, which is I think the second tallest mountain in Vardenfell. The low draw distance makes it hard to tell. Up at the mount, we're approached by a flame Atronak who challenges us to solve a riddle. A metal, neither black nor red, as heavy as man's golden greed. What you do to stay ahead, with friend or arrow or steed. The correct answer is lead. I think keeping the rhyming scheme is the riddle here, as I don't know what color lead is supposed to be, nor do I have any inkling how heavy daedric, glass, or ebony are compared to lead. Further in the cave, we meet a frost Atronak with another riddle. If you lie to me, I will slay you with my sword. If you tell me the truth, I will slay you with a spell. And I tell him he'll slay us with a spell, catching him in a paradox and earning our passage. Remember, people who stake life and death on riddles are entirely irrational and will likely kill you if you try to invoke a paradox on them. Finally, we meet a storm Atronak with its own riddle. My fellow Atronak, Zedius Soko, was slain. The Altmer claims the Dunmer is guilty. The Dunmer says the Khajiit did it. The Orc swears that he didn't kill Zedius Soko. The Khajiit says the Dunmer is lying. If only one of these speaks the truth, who killed Zedius Soko? Now, I actually figured this one out without using a wiki. Okay, basically, the Orc did it because that's what Orcs do. The actual logic is the Dunmer accuses the Khajiit and the Khajiit says the Dunmer is lying. Both of these people can't be right because only one person is telling the truth, which means they can both be ruled out. The Orc and the Altmer are thus lying, and since the Orc's lie is about the murder, that makes him the suspect. I like that each of these races basically summarizes how those races are characterized in this game, and also this is kind of a reference to the 2 murder mystery quests in this game. This opens the way to the shrine and completes our pilgrimage. But wait, we're missing the 4th challenge. Where's the watermelon Atronak? We get tasked with some real work to take out a necromancer working near Molag Mar. Guess what factions he's a part of? Oh, that was supposed to be a joke, because it's not in my notes or in the quest page that he was a rogue Telvanni. I mean, he's the lowest rank of the faction, but still. Totha Sil. One of the priestesses has a vision of an artifact, and not one of the Lalatia Varian brand visions where I need to hire a consultant to figure out what it means. She knows that it's right across the pond at Aldsatha. Oh yeah, I have an amulet that basically renders me invisible. I somehow forgot about that. We're then tasked with wiping out a Shiggurath cult here in Vivek in the sewer level. I kind of panic because I get attacked as soon as I enter and realize I haven't saved in a while, but it goes okay. Shiggurath is even thrilled to see me.
Fetch the Fork of Horapulation from the Mad Hermit near Aldredania. Take care with him. He's not the most stable man.
And so, I have done enough menial, and perhaps not so menial labor, to earn my way up to the near top, where I get to meet the Archcanon, Tholer Serioni. He wants to retire, on the condition I make some pilgrimages to the four corners of the House of Troubles. So, when the temple was starting out, they had to pay lip service to the old gods of the Dunmer, who were called Chimer back then. The Daedra. The Chimer were kind of unique in having their entire pantheon be Daedra, as opposed to most Merrick cultures that worship Aedra. But like all Mer, they do agree that Lorcan was kind of a prick for pulling that whole mortality stunt. The Chimer pantheon were split into two groups based on temperament, the good and the bad Daedra. The good Daedra were the Anticipations, Boethia, Azura, and Mephala. The Anticipations were meant to back up the Tribunal. Boethia is the anticipation of Almalexia. She was the one who defeated the Adric god Trinimac in combat and ate him. Mephala is the anticipation of Vivek, teaching the Dunmer in trickery and political organization. Azura is the anticipation of Satha Sil. She is who they mistakenly attribute their change from the Chimer to the Dunmer as being a gift. We'll get to that next episode. The other side of the anticipations are the four corners of the House of Troubles. These are Mayrene's Dagon, Shiggurath, Malakath, and Molag Bal. Fans will recognize why these guys have their reputations, with Dagon and Shiggurath in particular earning their reputations in this very questline. Malakath is alleged to be Trinimac, although even he himself will admit this is a far more literal interpretation than reality. He represents the ostracized, which makes a great deal of sense considering much of the old Dunmer culture was founded on Veloth being contrary to the Aldmer. Molag Bal, well, let's just say there's multiple stories about Molag Bal earning his title as the King of Rape, in more than one meaning of the word. Each of the Daedra worshipped by the Dunmer make a degree of sense in terms of their culture. Boethia for their martial culture, Mephala for the political guile, Azura for prophecy, Mehrunes Dagon for the spirit of warfare, Shiggurath, Malakath for their history as spurned Mer, and Molag Bal for their sense of superiority over other races. So why in the world are we making pilgrimages to the bad Daedra? Well, I can guess a few reasons. The first is that, generally, the temple trusts its upper echelon to be faithful enough to deal with the four corners. The second guess would be that the temple only discourages Daedra worship as they don't trust common Dunmer to do it safely. The third guess would be that it is a necessary function of an Archcanon to know the four corners well enough prior to a situation where he would need to know them, as seems to happen frequently in Dunmer history. Our first pilgrimage is to Malakath and requires the donation of 4 Daedra hearts, which are actually pretty easy to get in this game. The shrine is surrounded by hostile worshippers. Luckily I can just avoid them, and we recite a giant block of text. Basically, the temple was built on a bad foundation, 4 pillars of trouble, or the Daedra, and yet the Dunmer through faith still serve the latter thanks to the temple. Next, we journey to a shrine of Mayrene's Dagon, which happens to be at Aldsatha. We have to kill his worshippers this time, and we recite a poem. Then we go to Molag Bal, who's over at Bal-Ur, and after clearing out the Nord populace, I hear the distant sound of someone getting hurt, which is pretty damn spooky. This one teaches me a command humanoid spell, which is a slightly overpowered spell if used properly, so thanks, Uncle Molag. The fourth corner is Shiggurath, and Serioni tells us that we need to renew our pact with him, kind of indicating my third guess as being correct. We have to do this by locating something called the Gamble Putty, and donating it to him at his shrine at Aldredroth, where a giant battle is occurring. Here we get to meet some Ordinators, and actually we've been seeing them for a while, and I spoke on them last episode. They're the members of House Endoril, serving as the militant arm of the temple. They aren't to be confused with the Buoyant Armigers who work up at the Ghost Gate fighting the 6th House. Ordinators are the guards of Vivek and Molag Mar, and apparently get to go out on missions such as this one. Ordinators are some of the toughest guards in the game, and particularly notable, Ordinators become hostile if you adorn their armor, which is some of the best medium armor in the base game, and will put you on their permanent shit list. This, their terrible attitudes,
"We're watching you, scum."
And their proclivity to summarily execute heretics has given them a bad reputation. But that's the Order of Inquisition. This is the Order of War, who are responsible for fighting Daedra in the 6th House. They are apparently bad at their job, since to this point their only known mission outside of this one was to recover the robe of St. Roris, and they failed in that regard. They aren't faring too well here either, being matched in combat by Shiggurath worshippers. And mind you, one of the orcs here thinks he's a cat. We managed to meet the head of the cult, who says we're welcome, noting that the Ordinators are currently trying to crash the party. I hang around for a bit and then slip an orc some moon sugar, who tells us there's something under his pillow for us, the Sugar Fairy. Sure enough, there's the Gamble Putty. Always the first place you look. We give it to the statue and it fortifies random attributes as a reward. Sterione congratulates us on our work and has one final pilgrimage before promoting us to... Patriarch? Not Archcanon? Oh, right, you're part of the main quest, so we can't replace you. His final task is to recover the Ebony Mail. The Mail is an artifact of Boethia, and is located at a shrine atop Mount Asarnabibi. This is Levitate 1. And this is Levitate 100. And this is Levitate 500. I better knock that off before the Xbox crashes. Anyways, we just activate the shrine and boom, free Ebony Mail, which is arguably the best armor in the game. We even get to keep it and get our promotion to Patriarch. But was that really it? Just climb a mountain and activate a shrine, no puzzle, no intrigue? Kind of a letdown. I have mixed feelings about the Tribunal Temple. On the one hand, it's a well-fleshed out religion that represents the Dunmer well, but on the other hand, it's another quest line with no overarching narrative. Which is sad. After the Seven Graces and the quest dealing with the False Incarnate, I would have hoped that the temple had been a bit more exploratory in some of its big themes, like the secret authoritarian police thing, or its battle with the Sixth House. Even maybe just a quest line where we try to repair the temple's presence in Telvanni territory. It's ironic that some of the most interesting aspects of the temple from the main quest aren't featured at all in the actual temple quest line itself. That said, I do appreciate where the game was going with the pilgrimages. I wish all of them were as intricate as the one where you had to drown yourself in a display of faith. The way the final pilgrimage ends, no riddles, no challenges, just activate a shrine and get your reward. There are some quests I didn't do that are combat oriented, including one that is basically a ding-dong ditch at Dagothar's house, and another one that involves wiping out the head of the vampire clans, one that involves killing the head of a Sixth House cult, and a final one that involves killing some Daedra worshippers in Vivec. But I got away without doing them because with how the faction is paced, you'll end up getting enough rep to end up finishing the faction before you're told about them. So ultimately, your experience with the faction can be rather dry since the big combat quests it's building to are functionally optional. The four factions I covered in this section, the Imperial Legion, the Imperial Cult, the Morag Tong, and the Tribunal Temple, round off the final four of the major factions of Morrowind. The Legion, somewhat unlike the Fighters Guild in House Redorn, is a true warrior faction that requires its members don heavy armor. The Cult and the Temple are for monk players, providing multiple options for meaty religious factions while also being a good fit for mage characters, and the Tong sits as the game's only avenue for assassin characters, although House Hulau can somewhat fill in that niche. There are a couple more technical factions that bear mentioning that didn't get any coverage. The Twin Lamps is an abolitionist organization with a few quests. To join, you need to free 21 slaves. Many slaves can be found in various smugglers' caves, a few in Telvanni territory, but the bulk of slaves can be found in Halau territory. While many Dunmer will give their opinions on the topic of abolition, it seems that either the idea wasn't able to be fully implemented into a full faction, or the implication is that abolition has only recently become a cause due to how recent the Empire's arrival in Vardenfell was. Either way, I think Bethesda wouldn't have had to dance around the issue of slavery so much later on if they had done a proper abolitionist questline in the first place. There are also 3 vampire clans that are functionally similar, their only difference being their stat alignments. They each only have 2 quests. I was originally going to work them in, but honestly I realized they would just be unnecessary weight for the analysis. There's a questline where we get a Khajiit girlfriend, and Captain Vero at Moonmoth Fort has a couple quests where we dish out some vigilante justice in Balmora. I hope that, at this point, it becomes apparent just why I'm so disappointed in the later game's faction choices. Douglas Goodall did a good job of showing how the various factions can interplay and wrote in logical solutions to a few quests. The quest lines are also far less linear, providing unique paths that each repeat playthrough can go down, even so far as having completely alternate endings such as in the Fighters Guild, and the sheer number of them. 3 guilds, 3 houses, 2 temples, a military, and a cult. And then you throw in the main quest on top of all that. There are also no dynamic quests, as they haven't been implemented into the engine yet. This means each quest is handcrafted, for better and for worse. That said, there are some quests that are pretty boring, but even that can add to the experience and help with role-playing. Not every faction should feel super high stakes in its conclusion. And one thing I should note that doesn't seem to come off in my videos is that this isn't an example of Morrowind being the perfect Elder Scrolls game, just that I wish it had actually received a sequel instead of a downgrade. The factions, unfortunately, provide little to do after conclusion. This is a problem that is universal in Elder Scrolls. Once you take over, the questline is over. Another problem is that being the leader of certain factions would provide resolution to certain issues that it doesn't. The Black Jinx quest is a nice example of where that works, but many examples where it doesn't are present in the main quest line. Let's just say that if you do the main quest after completing even one of these factions, you will raise your eyebrow at some point at some of the problems. For instance, being the leader of the Tribunal Temple would resolve some of the stakes in the quest line, but the game cannot account for all the combinations of possibilities. This is likely one of the reasons Bethesda would strip back the number of factions in the later games. For example, it's doubtful that Odril Helvi would ask the highest ranking member of the Imperial Legion to smuggle ebony. House Tovani would not accept the membership of a prominent member of the Mages Guild, and vice versa. There's a clip on YouTube where the guy that challenges you before entering Sovngarde will respond to some of your achievements in your playthrough, and people are actually impressed that there are voice lines responding to your achievements in a game with 5 factions. My dream for an Elder Scrolls game is one where these faction combinations would logically play out. I like the idea of exclusivity between factions, and I hate the idea that the main character of each game is also the character that is supposed to have completed those factions. Each faction should require a new playthrough so that each playthrough can fully explore a different playstyle without having to compete with already built characters. That's part of the reason why I made 7 different characters for this analysis. And what I definitely want are factions that you can actually lead. They kinda got close with this with the Arena faction in Oblivion. Where's the ability to create and assign writs of execution at the risk of angering Mephala? Or handle assignments in the guild? Or make political decision in the houses? I thought the war conference scene in Skyrim could have gone so much harder into faction relations. If the threat in the main questline threatens the world, then all the prominent factions should be involved. But I understand it's a lot of work, and it's easy for me to spout ideas on the internet when I don't have much in the way of real experience in game development. Bethesda needs to get back to making good Elder Scrolls games before they can start to focus on improving their formula. Because what I want isn't Morrowind, it's a true sequel. And I think, with all the goddamn money they've made, that it's about time we got one. Indaris had encounters with the Daedra near the end of his journey, so let's see those same Daedra from the perspective of a Daedra worshipper. In between the original release of this series and this complete edition, there was a new character, an Orcish warrior known only as Umbra. Morrowind has 7 Daedra quests. Rather than including the entire pantheon, only Daedra relevant to the Dunmer culture are worshipped on Vardenfell. These Daedra are predictably the good and bad Daedra of the Tribunal Temple. Let's tackle the good Daedra first. Azura's shrine sits in the open air at the apex of the island's southeastern shoreline. Despite being the most visible, the shrine is empty due to its distance from civilization. Speaking with the statue, Azura made a bet with Sheogorath that one of her worshippers could live in isolation for a century and retain her sanity. Well, time's almost up, and wanting to win, Sheogorath has gone and sent a bunch of Daedra to her shack to defraud the wager.
You have come here for a reason, though you may not know what it is.
Now, the quest designer made this nice area where you would fight through waves of Daedra up the hill to the shack, except I would be willing to bet pretty much everyone who has ever done this quest came at it from the east because they traveled to the island from Dagon Fell. Anyways, kill all the Daedra and grab a signet ring of Sheogorath. You can actually fail the quest if you go inside the shack, which is a good touch. You get 2 rewards from this quest, first being the signet ring. Like most things Sheogorath, it comes with an up and a downside. Upside is a 10-point personality fortification, while the downside is a 10-point willpower penalty. The ring is still useful since you can equip and unequip it dependent on the situation. The other reward is Azura's Star, a versatile throwing weapon. Wait, is that right?
For you, our thanks and blessing, our gift and token given. Come, take this thing from the hand of God. Take this and use it wisely.
Let's see what you're made of.
Okay then. Azura's Star is actually a reusable soul gem, which is especially useful in Morrowind because you don't get reliable access to grand level soul gems for a long time. Even in general, the star is useful given the high probability of failure when enchanting. It's also the only soul gem capable of capturing the souls of... Moving on, Boethiah's quest. It's an easy quest once you figure out how to start it. Unless you spend a lot of time swimming along the coasts, the only non-internet related way to find the shrine is to meet Maik the Liar and chat with him. Most of what he says is either bullshit or is channeling the rod god Todd himself except for discussion on the shrine. Once you find the shrine at the bottom of the ocean, she'll ask you rebuild her shrine in exchange for a fancy sword.
What do you want with me, mortal? My shrine is in ruins. My priests have forgotten me. Will you rebuild my shrine, mortal?
Her only clue is to find a sculptor in Caldera, which will eventually take you to the Gorok Manor, an orcish home which happens to house the Scamp Creeper, which is fitting since Maik name drops Mr. Mudcrab but not Creeper. Anyways, you meet the sculptor and he says he'll need 2,000 gold and 3 weeks to build the shrine. He's not kidding. 3 weeks pass, which I spend doing other quests, and the shrine is complete. The quest really is that simple, as the bulk of it seems to be finding the shrine and waiting the time. It's fitting that all Boethiah wants is a new shrine to hand over her legendary sword Goldbrand.
You have done well. The shrine is a worthy one, and my power will again be felt.
She doesn't have any other shrines on Vardenfell, and she hands over her only other notable artifact, the ebony mail, to the Patriarch of the Temple just as easily for being able to treat with the bad Daedra and stay loyal. Ordinarily, Boethiah is usually involved in deception. I'm guessing her characterization here is meant to reflect the fact that of the three good Daedra, Boethiah has the worst PR. Azura is openly worshipped by the Ashlanders, and Mephala has an entire legal cult in the Morag Tong. Meanwhile, Boethiah's shrine has probably sat at the bottom of the ocean since the end of the First Era. I mean, it's sitting squarely in the channel which was sunk after Red Mountain's eruption during the Battle of Red Mountain. Finally, Mephala. Unlike Boethiah and Azura, her shrine is located in one of the faction hubs, which makes sense given her relationship with the Morag Tong. Mephala's secretary tells us that she wants us to take care of a Morag Tong assassin who's been doing some unauthorized freelance work. We have to break into his Balmora home, which doesn't show up on the map, without getting within a certain distance of him, and poison his kettle before escarpering. This quest is more dynamic than the average Morrowind quest, although it also has a hefty list of things that can go wrong if you don't do things exactly right.
You have done well, mortal. There are some things that must be done to preserve the order, and it will be amusing for me when this business comes to light. I look forward to it.
Our reward is the Ring of Khajiit, which gives a beefy 30-second invisibility and fortify speed 10 to 20 points for 30 seconds. Mephala's counterpart representation in the Morag Tong was a collection quest to find a bunch of sanguine artifacts that she had been given out. Mephala isn't much of a character since she speaks through someone else instead of speaking directly to the player, the only Daedra in the game to do so, but she is the Shadow Queen. This leads into the bad Daedra. Let's handle this in the same order as the Tribunal Temple. Malakath wants a 4 Daedra heart donation in the temple questline, while he just wants us to find his shrine at Asurdaralapal. This is significant because there are 8 different shrines to Malakath in Morrowind: Zerganapal, Kastarari, Shash Pilamat, Ashur-Nabibi, Ashur-Tartes, Durshuraran, and the Shrine of Malakath we visit in the temple questline. There's not really any clues which shrine is the one that Malakath is taking calls at, so you might end up killing 1 or 20 orcs before you find the right one. Orcs love Malakath, and Malakath loves them back. Malakath requests we clear up the matter of a Dunmer hero, Orain Bearclaw, who was falsely credited with the deeds of his orcish ally, and we clear this up by wiping out his bloodline. He actually has 2 separate intros contingent on if you're an orc or not. Our character happens to be an orc.
You have summoned me, orc? Have you come to restore the honor of your people?
Malakath sends you to Vivek, which in turn leads to Narmak. Turns out that Fervin Arain is pretty weak and his bodyguards do the bulk of the heavy lifting, like Progenitor, like Successor. Even now, the Orains are taking credit for others' work. The helm you get is a really solid heavy helm with some impressive stats to boot.
You have killed the false hero and shed more to follow. You have helped bring back honor to the Orcish people, and for that, I am glad.
Malakath's quest here fits his characterization as an orc fetishist.
I'm just trying to get out premium art content to myself, because I fucking love it, pal, and it looks so fucking good, and it's just that tight green skin. Oh, ah!
Can I just say that I love orcs? One of the books in the game is a story about the king of the orcs, Gortwog Gro Nagorm, who fought a duel against a Breton prince for Orsinium. Except one of Gortwog's supporters taught the prince how to fight in orcish armor so that Gortwog would have a challenge. Apparently, Gortwog believed that Malakath was sabotaging the Orsimer to keep them as a loyal but outcast society, and officially only Trinimac was recognized as the god of the orcs. I mean, he's absolutely right, and it's oh so convenient that his Orsinium fell during the Oblivion Crisis. The next corner of the House of Troubles is Mehrunes Dagon, whose shrine is at Yasamadan. Now, I could list all the Mehrunes Dagon shrines, but we actually came here during the Morag Tong questline to grab one of the threads of the web spinner. Mehrunes would like us to go to the tomb in Molag Mor and retrieve Mehrunes' razor.
Why do you call on me, little mortal? Do you seek your death so soon?
Farewell.
I should crush you where you stand. Yet you show mettle by even approaching me. How ambitious are you, little one? My razor, slayer of man and myr, scourge of all who stand before it, lies dormant, stolen by an unworthy bearer, an elf of little courage or consequence. It lies unused, gathering dust in the Alas tomb near Molag Mar. Return it to me, mortal.
We only find a rusty dagger, which we return to the shrine, and it's magically transformed into the razor.
Find something?
You found
Safe
my
travels.
razor. Good. Can you feel its hunger? Can you feel its frustration? Now I will make it again what it once was, what it shall always be. Draw a line of blood across the land in the name of Mehrunes Dagon.
Watch your back.
You might ask if that is it, and the answer is yes. I'm not sure why this quest is so short. I mean, Mehrunes Dagon is probably busy planning that whole invasion of Tamriel thing, and maybe he just wanted someone to bring the blade back into the fold. But the quest proper doesn't really have anything to do with the themes or character of Mehrunes Dagon, which is similar to the counterpart Tribunal Temple questline. Even his voice actor sounds similar to a certain other demonic entity in Morrowind.
What a fool you are.
Perhaps they weren't quite sure what they wanted Mehrunes Dagon to really be. Molag Bal is the third corner. His shrine, the relevant one anyways, is at Yamsiramas. His counterpart quest in the temple took place at Bal-Ur, a more fitting name, and ended with a command humanoid spell, so that's the quest to beat. Molag Bal says that one of his minions, Minta Na, has been obeying the temple's stay-at-home order instead of going around terrorizing the population.
Why do you summon me now? I have no time for your pleadings, weakling.
The Daedroth is living in a cave in the heart of the Ashlands, and we go off to kill it. The reward is the Mace of Molag Bal, which is a solid mid-tier weapon. I mean, it's the best mace in the game, meaning that it's outclassed by Ebony and Up longswords. This is a pretty simple quest that is also missing substance.
You have freed the soul of Mentamna. Torment will be his. Endless agony is all he will know until the end of time.
The final corner is Sheogorath. He had the most developed of the Tribunal quests as we were renewing our subscription to Dunmer Sanity. Well, the shrine we need to visit is Ihinipalit, which we cordially visit and subsequently wiped out during the temple questline. Even if you kill all the worshippers, Shigarath is willing to request that we go up to Sheogorath, meet one of his guys, and get the Fork of Horripilation in order to take out a giant bull netch plaguing his worshipper.
What is it, mortal? Have you come to be of service to Shigarath? That in and of itself speaks toward your madness. This pleases me.
This can be a bit of a challenge, especially if you aren't skilled with Short Blade. You just need to land the killing blow with the fork, but it's still a bit of a challenge. Your reward is the Spear of Bitter Mercy, which is not a Shigarath artifact. It's a Hircine artifact that was created by Mehrunes Dagon.
Perhaps you've gotten a taste of madness as well? Do not believe madness to be a curse, mortal. For some, it is the greatest of blessings. A bitter mercy, perhaps, but mercy nonetheless.
Speaking of Hircine, his artifact, the Savior's Hide, is at Divithfir's tower, except Malakath worshippers, like with all things, contend that the hide is actually a Malakath artifact. In either event, its properties were designed to protect the wearer from the Spear of Bitter Mercy. Well, don't worry, because we'll be getting more Hircine content in the Blood Moon expansion. It's interesting how much of a variable the Daedra quests are. It feels like the core of the quests was spaced out to be filled in later, and later only came for a couple of the quests. Of course, there are only 7 Daedra quests compared to the typical 16 in most of the games, for the purpose of filling the appropriate Daedra for the Dunmer culture. Peryite just doesn't fit in. But I feel like getting less than half of the Daedric princes could only be validated if all of the quests were as meaty as, or meatier than, the Sheogorath quest. So let's go on a quest. A real quest, which doesn't have any journal entries. Let's get a full set of Daedric armor. There are only 2 complete sets in the game. One is in the possession of Telvanni Lord Divithfir, who is level 65, has 1,000 health, and is wearing said set of powerful Daedric armor. So we're off to complete the set. Starting with the gauntlets, a pair can be found deep in the ancient Dunmer stronghold of Kogorun. This is one of the main dungeons of the main quest, and is full of 6th House cultists. Onto the pauldrons, the right pauldron can be found in the tower of Castle Karstag over on Solstheim. Yeah, there are a couple pieces that couldn't be found in the base game outside of Divithfir himself. The left pauldron is found inside Norarindur, a dungeon located in the city of Mournhold in the Tribunal expansion. This one takes the most effort because you have to do about half of the Tribunal questline in order to open up the dungeon, and even then actually finding the pauldron is difficult given the low light conditions. I can easily imagine a situation where players cleared this dungeon and didn't realize they were missing on some fantastic loot. A pair of Daedric boots can be found in the fortress of Galum Deus, a vampire stronghold home to Clan Burn. You are guaranteed to visit the clan during the House Telvanni questline and can potentially visit it during the Tribunal Temple questline. Moving on to the Greaves, there are 3 potential pairs to get. The first is a reward from Mistress Dratha of House Telvanni, which will be enchanted with a 50-point feather effect. This can help with the immense weight of Daedric equipment. The second option is at Druskathzi, the stronghold of the vampire clan Quora. Outside of typical adventuring, the player is only likely to come here if they become a vampire and either join their patron clan or work for House Telvanni. Then, the third option is at the Drin Plantation, sitting on a shelf behind Kamanatong leader Orvis Drin. A number of quests send you here, so the Greaves are probably the one piece of the Daedric set most players have gotten their hand on. It's not even that difficult to steal, what with this convenient pole next to Drin. The Cuirass has 2 options, and only one of them belong to the base game. It's also a reward from Mistress Dratha with its own 50-point feather effect covering about half of its weight. The other option is inside Norarindur, next to where we got the left pauldron. Finally, we have the choice of not 1, but 3 different Daedric helms, called Faces. In order of lowest to highest armor rating, the Face of Inspiration, the Face of Terror, and the Face of God. The Face of Inspiration can be found in 3 places. One is worn by Galdo Omain, the leader of the Buoyant Armigers. Another can be found in Mimea, a large 6th house base, and a third can be found in Ibar Dad, a sorcerer's cave that leads into an ancient tomb. The Face of Inspiration is a fitting reward for whichever trial you should wish to face. Being the second strongest face, there are only 2 Faces of Terror. One is worn by Enar Drelo, a high-ranking Buoyant Armiger. So as long as you're willing to eat the bounty of wiping out the Ghost Gate, you could take care of 2 Faces in one go. Your other option is at Anonabia, which is a Daedric ruin we uncovered during the Imperial Cult questline near Sadrith Mora. As the strongest face, there is only 1 Face of God. In exchange for some Matzi, a Nord in the Telvanni Canton will tell you of a First-Age Nord who was buried in Tukashapal, and will provide a key. Tukashapal is an impressive dungeon. There's a maze which is invalidated by Levitate. So maybe the designer didn't know about the spell when he made the area, except the face is hidden on a ledge requiring Levitate to reach. It's weird, but just go with it. It should probably be reiterated that a complete set of Daedric armor is prohibitively cumbersome. At just under 300 pounds, you'll need 60 strength just to wear the armor, without any weapons or additional inventory. Luckily, our character for this run was strong enough to wear the full set. Daedric armor is pretty unique due to its rarity. Rather than armor being tiered in a vertical progression, it's more so a representation of the characters wearing the armor. Ebony is common among noble, fitting since ebony is a valuable material for crafting equipment. You can find plenty of orcish armor once you start meeting sects of Malakath worshippers, and Endoral armor is plentiful if you spend time fighting the law. Glass is the second rarest armor in the game, most easily found at the Ghost Gate, otherwise you'll only encounter odds and ends of the set, which is generally a shame as the Dark Brotherhood set gets delivered to the player for free. So, moving on, we've got one more big adventure to go on, but first, this is Umbra. Umbra remarks that he's traveled the world, killed many creatures and people alike. Despite everything, he has yet to die, and all he wants now is a warrior's death. His sword is also named Umbra, which is because he figures that given his accomplishments at this point, he may as well be named after his weapon. Yagrum Bagarn says the sword was enchanted by a witch to steal souls, but the sword would later be retconned into being a Clavicus Vial artifact. Clavicus Vial's mask is actually in the game, in a random side quest up in Dagon Fell, which is weird because it's one of the best helms for orcs since it fortifies personality. Anyways, Umbra is a powerful two-handed sword. While there are other swords that can potentially do more damage, Umbra will consistently hit harder as its damage range starts at a minimum of 10 damage compared to a Daedric Daikatana's range starting at a minimum of 1. While the concept of the old warrior wishing for a death he's too powerful or too skilled in combat to receive is a bit of a cliche, I find it's a good fit for the Elder Scrolls setting. Umbra serves as an analog for the fate of the player character once you close the game that last time, similar to the concept of hollowing from Dark Souls. In fact, Umbra is largely a metaphor for myself, someone who has seen everything the world has to offer. The world insofar as Vardenfell anyways. Imagine you're trapped playing the same Morrowind character forever. You're probably a good person, and you probably project an idealistic aspect into your decision making. Maybe in reality you don't have the power to make things right, but in a fantasy world you have the opportunity to bring justice to a situation. But play long enough and you'll eventually be drawn to a dark side. The number of ordinary people I talk to who casually admit they killed this or that annoying NPC in an Elder Scrolls game for no reason other than being annoying is proof enough of this concept. Regardless of morality and where you end up, there will eventually be a point where the only thing a player character has left to do is die. But hey, at least we aren't simulating pain and hunger for the purposes of making more realistic video game AI and then wondering why God would allow such evils to exist in our own world. Let's steer this philosophical nightmare back and discuss vampirism. There are 3 vampire clans on Vardenfell, and all vampires on the island belong to one of those 3 bloodlines. Thus, which bloodline infects you determines which type you will become. This is your standard RPG triangle fare of warriors, thieves, and mages, and the clans are exclusive per playthrough since once you get cured, you can't go back to being a vampire. Don't worry though, unlike the Great Houses, there isn't a wealth of content for you to choose from. Each clan, should you try to join them, will shun you, and will only give you 2 quests with which to ingratiate yourself into their ranks. I joined Clan Quora, which suited my warrior playstyle best. It should be noted that my joining required meta-knowledge of the game. While all vampires belong to a bloodline, which bloodline is not relayed to the player. So if you're trying to play while using the wiki as little as possible, it's going to be a gamble if you decide to keep your porphyric hemophilia which clan you'll actually end up being aligned with. Vampirism is a significant change to playstyle. Travel changes completely now that Siltstrider carabineers and boat captains refuse to speak with you. I suddenly found myself using the propylons to get around and complete my goals while I was a vampire. This can be a problem again for the person playing without a wiki since, as I've stated before, the propylon indexes are fairly obscure and difficult to find. I doubt players without access to the wiki or the master index plugin could find all of them. That's because many of them are hidden in plain sight, in the shop you pass by every time you go from the Caldera Mages Guild to Creeper, for example. Would anybody even think to carefully inspect the tent of the wise woman of the Urshalaka tribe to find the index for the stronghold closest to 2 of the vampire bases? Is this a failure in the system, or is this meant to heighten the difficulty for vampires without making it tedious? I suspect a certain degree of meta-knowledge is expected for vampires in Morrowind because it's meant to cater to players who have already mastered the game to some extent. If you're playing this game just because you're a vampire enthusiast, don't. This is an area where Bethesda marginally improved, if only by merit of not just having vampirism be an afterthought they were obligated to include because Daggerfall also had vampires. Where Bethesda succeeded with Morrowind's vampires was in turning the player into a superhuman monster. The player will see a significant improvement to strength, speed, fatigue management, and a handful of combat and magicka skills. Immunity to paralysis and common disease, a resistance to normal weapons such as iron and steel, and the ability to absorb health. There are downsides, such as losing the ability to regenerate health when resting, a weakness to fire attacks, and taking damage from the sun. Oh yeah, and almost everyone on Vardenfell will refuse to talk to you. Even if you managed to talk to people, you'd be unable to do quests or use services. Now, while I would understand a massive personality penalty, these limitations mean that vampirism is not a meaningful choice for the player. You'll never sit there and go, man, if I become a vampire, then I can finally beat this quest. Which is kind of the point. It's both the curse and a boon of Molag Bal. It's nature changing based on how you interpret it. Sometimes it happens to people against their will. Being powerless as a vampire dominates you and turns you either into cattle or sires you into a vampire. And sometimes people choose it thinking they can control the temptations that come with it. The choice aspect simply isn't there for Morrowind, which is a shame. That said, it is still mechanically interesting. It's the perfect challenge if you decide to eschew city life and just crawl Morrowind's dungeons. So how are the quests? Let's summarize. You'll get one quest to kill someone who's wronged the clan, and one quest to fetch an item that may involve killing someone. While the vampire quests might not be worth going into detail, they are somewhat interesting due to the challenges created by having to relearn how to travel. This is some ingrained knowledge we're talking about here. The most interesting of the vampire quests is ironically a cure for vampirism. It starts with getting advised to track down the book Vampires of Vardenfell 2. Curiously, despite its rarity, the book is available in a number of familiar locations. Moea from the Mages Guild, or Durnaran from Halau in Telvanni, Voss from the Thieves Guild. It seems the player is intentionally meant to encounter the book at least in some playthroughs so they know where to find it. The book details a small piece of Tamrielic lore regarding vampire hunters and ends with a paragraph telling of a buoyant armiger who had been cured of vampirism. While Galler Rarathi wrote a more detailed account of this, copies of which are found in the hidden archives of Clan Byrne, the Sixth House, and the Tribunal Temple, Vampires of Vardenfell 2 actually says enough to figure out the cure. This involves going to the shrine at Balur and requesting Molag Bal cure you.
So, you do not enjoy the blood hunger, little leech. Do you miss the warmth of the sun?
I'm not sure why his other shrines don't qualify, but I didn't make the rules. Since we've done prior freelance work for Molag Bal before and have a positive rating, we get preferential treatment in the Daedric version of Fiverr, and Molag Bal gives us a quest. He has us kill his daughter, Molag Grunda, who's run off with some Atronak. This simple task will see us being cured of vampirism.
Little vampire. It was not easy for me to obtain the cure, but I was able to pry it from Vermina after some discussion.
We lose most of our newfound power and are given a chance to reintegrate into society. It's just that easy. Again, the later games would improve the vampire experience. Vampires of Vardenfell notes how the cure to vampirism is kept a secret to discourage people from intentionally becoming vampires, but Morrowind makes the cure look easy. Skyrim at least made it so you had to damn someone by soul trapping them to get cured, but because you can be reinfected and cured again, it undercut that theme in the same breath by treating the cure for vampirism like a prescription rather than the human sacrifice it's supposed to be. Umbra will see a return for the Blood Moon expansion. For now, I hope you see that there is more to Vardenfell than just a dozen or so faction quest lines. Umbra was in fact able to carve out an entire adventure out of side dungeons and random quests. Morrowind is a rich world to explore outside of its semi-scripted questline experiences. We are finally shaking the yoke of these black bars and terrible resolutions. I'm using OpenMW instead of playing the base PC copy, partially because the base game is in 4x3. It's a stylized part of the game though, right? Well, no. Unlike a hand-drawn art style, Morrowind is a 3D game. It can afford to fit on my, and now your, screens. So what do we get for playing on PC? Cheats. That I didn't need or ever use. I've had a few quests bug out over the years, like a playthrough where my Telvanni stronghold never actually appeared, or common longer-term playthrough issues like Silt Strider guides falling off their platforms, but I've honestly had a pretty stable time playing Morrowind for this series. I suspect this is in part because of the fact that I avoided playing a single character for everything. So because none of my characters got more than 20 hours in game, there wasn't enough time for any game-breaking bugs to happen. Because remember, I was not playing on an exactly stable port of the game until now. I was playing on what should have been its buggiest incarnation. Another perk of the PC is this godly user interface, and one right click and instantly, all the interface you could need for any situation. On the Xbox, there were 4 separate panels that you navigated with the black and white, or on more modern controllers, bumper buttons. That is because your average Xbox player is playing from across the room, sitting on their couch, and needs to be able to see information on screen, meaning that the smaller text and icons on the PC version won't cut it. Here on PC, if I say I want to cast a spell, I just right click, no need to switch over to another panel. And the screens are customizable. You're able to change the size of the windows, so non-magic players can diminish their magic menu. You can also sticky one of them onto your screen so you can continue seeing your map while you play. But of course, that convenient and godlike user interface was traded in for the inefficient, divided, panel-based system in all Bethesda games going forward because console parity. We also get a steady frame rate, the AI will no longer forget what they're doing for multiple seconds, and I will no longer lose button presses into the void of stuttering frame rate. Overall, we're in for an immensely enjoyable experience as I begin to try and break this game in every way I can. I'll be brief, because if you know anything about Morrowind, you know about the alchemy snowball. In effect, the effectiveness of any created alchemy potion is determined by a few factors, one of those factors being intelligence. Some merchants in Morrowind restock in ingredients immediately after ending dialogue with them, and some of those ingredients fortify your intelligence. So, grabbing a free set of Master's Alchemy equipment sitting unsupervised in the Caldera Mages Guild, we go to work. The early game will look like this. I repeatedly buy 10 alchemy ingredients until I have a few hundred or so, spam the create potion button, sell the byproducts, and profit. Once I have a decent chunk of cash, I go and buy hundreds of ashiams and netch leather, which is used to fortify intelligence. Fortify intelligence increases the effectiveness of potions created, and the value of potions are determined based on their effect values, meaning that I'm grinding these useless drain personality potions out, and their value is gradually increasing, decreasing the intervals between when I rest and allow Nalcaria to restock her cash supply. And so, Morrowind's market was flooded with useless drain personality potions, and my pockets were flooded with cash. You can go farther with this. These Fortify Intelligence potions increase my magicka by tens of thousands, in a game where 1,000 magicka is close to the normal limit. However, the real draw is for training. While doing this, I gain skill points in alchemy. Then I go train armor skills like heavy and medium armor and a third attribute skill. So every level I'm getting max points in intelligence, endurance, and a third attribute like speed or strength. Your overall health in Morrowind is determined by endurance. In particular, however, it's determined by your endurance at all levels. Endurance affects starting health as well as health gain per level. So if you have 50 endurance, you gain 5 health a level. Our goal is to get to 100 endurance or 10 health per level as fast as possible. This comes pretty quick as I strategically decided that heavy and medium armor were not major or minor skills. This meant training was cheap since I was starting at skill level 5. By the time I start playing, I'm around level 20. I have several hundred hit points, magicka, fatigue, and high levels in skill in many weapon and armor types, as well as utility skills like speechcraft and mercantile. And this isn't even the most you can min-max in Morrowind, but it is pretty close. So let's go a step farther. With a handful of artifacts, we can take our character to the next level. Again, this isn't the most min-maxed build in Morrowind. You can go farther depending on what you want to accomplish. The first is the Apprentice Ring, which is pretty close to where we start inside a need. This is basic stuff, plus 10 to intelligence and willpower. This helps the early game alchemy snowball and helps us with some magicka issues. Our next grab are a pair of boots. Going north out of Caldera, we meet a woman desperate for escort to Nar Mok. You'll notice she's quite quick, and sure enough, after the escort, she's willing to part with her magic boots. What makes these boots magic are 2 effects. Fortify speed 200 points, blind 100 points. By default, the boots will make you very fast, and also make the screen look like this. And your game will sound like this. Luckily, there is a resist magicka effect, which works for negative spell effects but not the positive ones. Meaning that if you were to reach 100% magicka resistance, you could resist the blind effect. But 100% magic resistance must be pretty difficult to reach due to being overpowered, right? Well, no, we're already at 50% by default on this character. We have the Atronach sign, which removes our ability to naturally generate magicka, but we get 2 times the max magicka and can absorb 50% of hostile spell effects. In addition, we are a Breton, which comes with an additive 0.5 times to our magicka and 50% magicka resistance. Long story short, we can resist half of the effect by default, dimming our screen to 50%. In addition, if we can cast a 1 second 50-point resist magicka effect, then put on the boots, we fully resist the blind for the rest of the game, and it's a cheap spell effect, because the game never updates to check if the resist magicka effect still nullifies the blind effect. Our next stop is to the Blood Moon expansion, doing the Tim Vol in the Well quest. It's pretty easy to dodge the higher level enemies given we have 200 plus speed, and Tim Vol is willing to see reason easily, giving us the Mantle of Woe. The Mantle of Woe has a great many effects. It fortifies magicka 5 times, which is additive to our 2.5 times. It also fortifies Conjuration 50 points. In exchange, we have a 20-point weakness to normal weapons, 100 points to Drain Personality, setting it to 0, and Sun Damage 20 points, which turns us into a vampire. But, we don't need to wear the robe all the time, which means we can get in fights and access our near 1200 points of magicka, then take it off the rest of the time. One more artifact. The Necromancer's Amulet, which you get from Archmage Trebonius Artorius, resists normal weapons 25%, fortifies intelligence 25 points, more magicka, restores health 1 point on self, and absorbs spells 25% on self. So now we have regenerating health, 75% spell absorption, and a partial normal weapons resistance. Yeah, this build wasn't worth it. This is because Morrowind will rarely rise up to the challenge I've issued, and that's part of the charm. Later Elder Scrolls games bent over backwards to try and balance the big 3 specializations out. Morrowind was unapologetic and allowed wizards to really shine. The more creative and more able to take advantage of the game's systems you are, the more you're allowed to get out of the game, and it's great. So let's get started with this main quest.
I'm out of range.
They have taken you from the Imperial City's prison, first by carriage and now by boat. To the east, to Morrowind. Fear not, for I am watchful. You have been chosen.
1 month after our arrival, we returned to Caius, who had given us 200 gold to start our work. We're now a member of the Blades, a secret intelligence agency working in service of the Emperor. Our first few tasks seem inane, but from the very first quest we're going to be introducing concepts and ideas that are important throughout. Caius will insist you acquire some experience, and I think this is going to reinforce it. Our first 2 quests will involve going to the local guilds for some information, just in case you haven't joined them yet. It's no coincidence that, as most new players will commonly pick fighter characters, our first task is to meet Hasfat Antibolus over in the Fighters Guild, and ask him about the Nerevarine and 6th House cults. We've dealt a bit with the 6th House cult before, but the Nerevarine cult is a new one. I promised that name wouldn't come back up, and I lied. Unfortunately, Hasfat doesn't have much info on them, but he can tell us about the 6th House, in exchange for a small favor. He wants us to get our hands on a Dwemer puzzle box, located in a nearby ruin of Arkanthand. This is a great first quest. In order to find the ruin, you have to pay attention to the directions given. That said, it's also a safe quest. If you get in over your head, you're right next to a Legion fort with all the necessary amenities. Meet Snowy Granius, or as I call him, the Bridge Wizard. He's a gear check. If you try to play Morrowind the same way you would play Skyrim, Granius is your rude awakening, and Caius warned you. On the surface, he's little more than a wizard bandit. He's only level 3, he knows some basic destruction spells and can summon a skeleton. But because he is, ostensibly, the main quest's first mandatory combat encounter, he's garnered a reputation. Obviously, he's no match for the monster I've created, but he deserves recognition because if Morrowind had those Dark Souls bloodstains, they'd be right about here. Before we enter the ruin proper, we have to figure out how to open the door. I could be wrong, but I think Hasfat has a throwaway line about it. This crank here opens the door. Arkanthand is an alright little first dungeon. It's basically 2 dungeons, the first a bandit area, the second a more traditional Dwemer ruin. Our objective, and indeed the only reason you're sent here, is actually right by the door, tucked away in an area not immediately drawn to the eye. You could explore this entire dungeon, reaching the end, a large vertical area, and not find the puzzle box, only to realize it was by the door the whole time. This is owing to the fact that dungeons in Morrowind are non-linear, but that isn't even entirely true. Some dungeons in Morrowind are non-linear, and some dungeons in Morrowind are a single hallway leading into a room. Dungeons in Morrowind are realistic by the standards of the universe, because in what world would the leader of a group of bandits put his living space as far as possible from the door? And in the real world, some people were buried in a mausoleum, and some people were buried in the pyramids. Once we return the box to Antibolus, he gives us some notes on the 6th house, and recommends we speak with Sharn Gramuzgob. You can read the notes at any time, as we'll be getting them back later. Indeed, Caius' next orders are to speak with Sharn Gramuzgob, a local alleged necromancer working out of the Mages Guild. Again, this is Bethesda subtly pushing the player towards a faction if they haven't already joined. She'll tell us what she knows about the Nerevarine cult, in exchange for a small favor. She wants us to visit an ancestral tomb, grab the skull of one Helival Andrano, and bring it to her. Read into this. She wants us to defile a local tomb, steal the skull of a native, and give it to an all but confirmed necromancer. Yeah, get used to that feeling. She does give us some tools to handle the undead in the tomb, which is a nice introduction to the concept of creatures who are immune to normal weapons like iron and steel, as they aren't going to be going away. I don't have as much to say about this quest as the other one. It's more of the same. Go to place, grab a thing. The tomb is much smaller of a dungeon, easier to get to, and more linear. I guess there is something to be said for making absolutely certain players are prepared for the coming escalation in difficulty. We get some notes on the Nerevarine cult, and report back to Caius. Caius, as an academic, wants us to corroborate our findings from the last 2 missions, with a big and complicated mission to collect intel in the big city, Vivec. I don't like questing in Vivec, and yet I like this quest. First, it matches the theme of the Blades as an intelligence organization, collecting information and doing favors. Second, each leg of the quest follows the same format, but does something unique. Third, each leg is set in a different part of Vivec, not just different cantons, different sections of the cantons, making them distinct in a way most Vivec quests just aren't. We're looking for 3 people, Helea, Adhiranir, and Mera Milo. Helea is in the foreign quarter and is about to be the victim of a hate crime before we step in. You can persuade them to leave Helea alone or just kill them. Afterwards, you escort Helea across the canton and he gives you some notes on the Nerevarine cult. Adhiranir is hanging out in the sewers of St. Olms. This isn't for fun, she is actually hiding down here, and finding her will entail searching the canton. She's hiding due to a census and excise agent looking for her. We deal with the issue, and she tells us that the 6th house has become a big client for smugglers, but nobody knows why. Mera Milo is in the library up at the temple. She asks we follow her into the back where it's more secluded, and tells us a bit about the Nerevarine cult, and suggests we find a copy of the book Progress of Truth. She even establishes a code word we can use in the event something goes wrong, like this is a proper spy story. The book can be found in a variety of locations, but the easiest is to just buy it at the local rare bookstore you happen to have escorted Helea to. Its rarity is owed to the fact that it has been officially banned by the temple for heresy. If you're curious where this is going, don't worry, we have one more quest before the big reveal. Caius is now interested in establishing an informant with the Ashlanders, nomadic tribes native to the island. He suggests we find and talk to Hassaur Zansubani, a former Ashlander working as a merchant. Caius notes that the Ashlanders have gift-giving customs and suggests we try to learn more about that. We meet up with Hassaur and discuss business with him. We find out that he enjoys reading poetry, and the local bookstore sells 3 different books that qualify. He already owns all 3, but appreciates the gesture and is willing to tell us what he knows. He has some information in the Nerevarine cult and on Ashlander customs. Mind you, none of that is really signposted. You don't get the words "buy the book" on your screen with a marker pointing to the local bookstore. You have to figure all this out on your own. And with that, we finally learn what Caius' game is. He isn't just collecting information for the sake of academics. We were sent here by the Emperor himself, Big U, a controversial figure noted for certain seer powers. We were released from Cyrodiil City Prison because we had met certain conditions of the Nerevarine prophecy, a prophecy that foreshadowed the reincarnation of Saint Nerevar. Caius admits skepticism at these claims, but as time has gone on and we have gathered information, he is somewhat less skeptical. However, Caius makes an important distinction that separates this game from other Chosen One style narratives. The Emperor isn't just sending us over because we are the Chosen One, but because there is a need to stop the 6th house. The temple is failing, the tribunal is growing weaker, and Vardenfell is under quarantine for a disease that could threaten the rest of the continent. Whether we are actually the Nerevarine or not is ultimately irrelevant. The Emperor is just hoping we can solve the situation, and as an added contingency should we fail, His legions are entrenched in strategic positions across the island to take over. We are not the only person capable of stopping this crisis. We just happen to be the cheapest at 87 gold. As to the situation at present, there are two cults on the island that relate to the current crisis, the Nerevarine cult and the Sixth House. The Dunmer people generally believe in the idea of the Nerevarine the same way my country casually believes in revelations. That is to say, your average Dunmer is ultimately unconcerned with the reincarnation of this ancient figure and the imminent apocalypse. The Nerevarine cult is more interested in this topic, and in particular, cataloging information forbidden by the Tribunal Temple. At this point in the quest, the motivations for the temple to discourage belief in the Nerevarine and punish false incarnates is an unknown. Caius is hopeful to meet the cult, and is dispatching us to meet its alleged leaders in the Urshulaku camp. This is a rather significant foray into hostile territory, up into the Ashlands in the north of the island. From a story perspective, it makes sense. From a gameplay perspective, it can cause whiplash. We go from our first quest having a tough dungeon, our second quest having an easier dungeon, but then our third and fourth quests are about finding people and figuring out how to get them to tell you what you want. And now we're on quest 5, and it's meant to be an escalation and challenge. Wouldn't it make more sense to start with the talkie-talkie missions, then move up to the easy dungeon, and then the hard dungeon, then the long trek north? Maybe people will get bored. All that said, the Urshulaku camp is one of my favorite quest lines in a Bethesda game. You have to figure out how to work your way into this society, but rather than having victory assured by presence, you have to do so using knowledge of said society. Knowledge that is not told directly to you by the quest giver, but gathered in a prior quest. This is just one of many reasons players who try to play on autopilot don't like Morrowind, because it isn't as simple as walking up to the wise woman and declaring yourself the chosen one. You are the stranger, and no one here has any cause to believe in you until you prove yourself. To earn your way up, you have to take into consideration what you learned about thoughtful gifts, but it isn't as rigid in formula. Other means of convincing people, such as persuasion or charm spells, are still just as valid a means of convincing the residents to arrange a meeting. It's a direct interplay of mechanics and storytelling without any kind of arbitrary restrictions. We're first directed to Zabamund, the second to Sul-Matul. He needs to be convinced, and there are a variety of options. You can try to intimidate him, which is dependent on your level. You can try to boast of your deeds, dependent on your reputation. You can offer a tribute, or should you be practiced in speechcraft, you can speak of what you've learned on your way here. This is one of the few moments where the writer, Ken Rolston, demonstrated an understanding of just what the text-based dialogue system was capable of in terms of skill checks. Unfortunately, it was underutilized, and ironically, it was Douglas Goodall who criticized Bethesda for not using skill checks and choices in Morrowind, despite himself never actually using them either. But I gotta cut him a break because he wrote enough material to fill 2.5 hours of video. Zabamund, once convinced, sends you to meet with Sul-Matul. He says in order for him to adopt us into the tribe as a clan friend, we need to pass an initiation rite and recover his father's bow at the Urshulaku Burial Caverns. It's interesting to consider how the ancestral tombs are advanced versions of this tribal burial cavern concept. It's the little details that make this game great. The caverns are a fairly complex dungeon, but you'll eventually find the ghost of Sol Sinopol, who on his defeat drops his bow. This makes us clan friend, and Sul-Matul permits us to speak with the wise woman, Nabani Mesa. And so begins a long dialogue with Nabani. She has a great deal of important insight that plays into the story, a bit too much. So much in fact that Nabani even offers to cut to the chase and answer if we are the Nerevarine. She figures that we are not at present, but may become it based on some of the qualifiers and the prophecies that she knows. When earth is sundered, and skies choked black, and sleepers serve the... Yeah, this is way too long for pretentiousness like that. The big takeaway is that there are 7 trials, and to present, we've met the first, which is the one described at the start of the game in the first cutscene. We're born on a certain day, which day it is isn't clear, but it's a reference to our birth sign. We're also born to uncertain parents, so the Nerevarine is an orphan born under a sign. Trial 2 remarks on immunity to disease. Trial 3 refers to Azura as well as Moon and Star. The 4th trial says that 3 houses will call us Hortator. The 5th trial says that 4 tribes will call us Nerevarine. The 6th and 7th trials are not particularly clear. And with both the Stranger and the 7 Visions, we have been told all Nabani knows. She remarks that there are lost prophecies that she doesn't know that may be in the hands of the temple. With that, we head back to Caius. Caius takes our notes and informs us he has a new assignment, one he warns is going to be tough. This is another progression in the difficulty, an expectation that the player is supposed to be out and about performing other work for the sake of self-improvement. The reason this works, especially compared to Oblivion and Skyrim, is that even though this is a plot about a chosen one stopping an ancient threat, said ancient threat is as dangerous now as he has been for decades, and we have no basis to assume he's even in the final stages of his plans. In Oblivion and Skyrim, and actually in Fallout 3 and 4 as well, there's a constant drive to go from main quest to main quest. There are rarely lulls in the action that allow you to disengage from the main quest and engage with the world instead. Whereas Morrowind is more masterful in providing multiple opportunities for the player to diverge and actually play the game. So to give an example, in Oblivion you watch the Emperor die in the tutorial, giving you specific directions to go to Wayne Priory. At Wayne Priory you're given explicit directions to hurry to Kvatch to save Martin. Once you escort Martin to Cloud Ruler Temple, you're given further urgent orders to investigate the Mythic Dawn before they summon Satan and the Four Horns of the Apocalypse sound. I can detail similar lines in each subsequent Bethesda game. The urgency of finding your father in Fallout 3, the urgency of dealing with the dragons in Skyrim, the urgency of finding your son in Fallout 4. Urgency removes agency in an open-world game, and it's the mistake that is often made by writers not realizing the storytelling opportunities presented by the interactive medium. Instead, they want to write engaging movie plots that build tension, which means that the world is neglected in the process. You cannot play a character that doesn't have these urgent issues in the back of their mind without undergoing some form of mental gymnastics. But I understand a desire to generate tension in a storyline, and Morrowind begins its dramatic rise with this quest. From here on, it becomes much more difficult to ignore the pressing threat of the Sixth House, which is not a bad thing. What I'm arguing for is simply early stepping off points in the story. Of course, our broken character is more than ready for the situation. According to Caius, a Legion patrol found a Sixth House base, so we need to locate it, take it out, and see what we can learn. We go to meet with Ray Sepulia at Buckmoth, and she tells us that the base is near Narmak. The original party was entirely wiped out, with a single survivor shambling back to the base afflicted with Corpus, barely eking out the cavern's location at Alunaby. Asking the locals in Narmak, we managed to find the cave, and it's a nice place. This is Dagoth Garrus. He's an Ashghoul. Garrus tells us that we should go to Red Mountain and meet Dagathur with open arms, and that the Sixth House will continue to be at war with us until then. Then he attacks us. He's a tough cookie, a fitting challenge to the rising escalation, but with his dying breath he curses us with Corpus, an infectious, incurable disease that will gradually deform us into a zombie. Caius figured this would happen, and refers us to Dr. Fear, the principal researcher of Corpus on the island. There's a missed opportunity to have fast travel services refuse to serve you, diegetically reinforcing the seriousness of this infection with a mechanical inconvenience. Divith Fear is interesting. He lives in a remote area with his 4 clone daughters and contributes to society by caring for the victims of and trying to cure Corpus disease. But, well, he hasn't cured it yet. What are the odds of him curing it in time to save us? I mean, it'd be a bit contrived. Go down to the Corpusarium, meet the last living dwarf, ask any questions you want, take some levitation potions up to Divith, get a potion poured down your throat, and while not getting cured, the negative effects are removed, rendering us immune to disease. Okay, there's a lot going on. Divith Fear is an ancient Dunmer wizard, hence his skepticism of the seriousness of events. He lived to see the fall of the Dwemer, the rise of the Tribunal, and the change from Resdayn to Morrowind. He's seen his share of wars, occupations, and the occasional Daedric crisis. We also meet Yagrum Begarn, who claims to be the last living dwarf. He says that while he was out in Oblivion at the time of the disappearance and spent a great deal of time looking for his people, to no avail. Eventually, he was afflicted with Corpus and found in the full thrall of the disease by Divith Fear, who restored him to some partial sanity. The Corpus affliction, for both him and us, is a bit advantageous. While it causes less than desirable growths all over the body, and mental degeneration similar to dementia, it also stops the progress of aging. This renders its victims effectively immortal, one of the reasons, despite Yagrum's health, he is so long-lived. Obviously, there are some questions. No, the treatment we are given doesn't work for others. If you return to Divith, he will remark that it killed the other patients he tried it on. Even if it had, our objective is to stop the source of Corpus, meaning that its applications as a reproducible way to become immortal are non-existent. We might have gotten some more info in the years following Morrowind had the Redcon year never happened. As to why it works for us, I'm just going to assume divine intervention from Azura. Just keep this little Corpus thing in the back of your mind moving forward. On our return to Caius, he informs us that we're being promoted to operative. This is the highest rank he can afford us at this time, as he's being recalled to Cyrodiil City for events possibly related to Elder Scrolls 4. But not to worry, operative makes us the ranking Blades member in Vardenfell. At least to Caius' knowledge. This marks the beginning of our operations as an independent agent. This is one of the big reasons I like Morrowind, because as the Chosen One, we don't have to answer to a boss, like the other games. Oblivion was absolutely terrible in this regard. Skyrim was a bit better by turning our bosses into mentors, but let's be honest, we still didn't have any agency. Caius' final standing order is to find the lost Nereverian prophecies and bring them to Damati Mesa. Our first step, then, should be to meet with Mera Milo and Vivek again and share what we learned from the Urshalaku Ashlander tribe. However, Mera is missing, and in her quarters she has left a note to Amaya. My brain's on autopilot. I don't remember what Amaya's supposed to mean. What do? Well, luckily we have the journal. I may hype this game up to be hardcore and require some serious mental firepower to solve mysteries that only smarty pants, big-brained boys like myself can do. That's not really true. The designers were generally pretty smart about using the journal to relay critical information to the player, or you could just be lazy and use the wiki. This creates a near constant sense of dramatic irony, where the player character is remembering and intuiting information that the player might not. I didn't use the journal a lot, but that is owing to my experience with the game. Occasions when I did use the journal were immensely helpful, especially since the player character often notes down directions to places in the journal. One problem I do have that was introduced in a patch for Morrowind is the quest log. This allows you to keep an active tab on all the quests you have at any given time. It's pretty ubiquitous for role-playing games, right? And it makes sense. Finding journal entries for a quest you accepted 2 weeks prior can be difficult. But I suppose it comes down to a difference in philosophy to me. I tend to play very focused characters, doing quests in order of urgency and often saying no to quests that are out of my way or are uninteresting. Most people seem to rack up a great number of quests simultaneously, accepting every quest that gets thrown at them. So for most people, a quest log is necessary to keep track of all that information. I think it's irresponsible to promise to do quests only to just let it sit in your log for weeks if not months. Are you really gonna let that rancher's guar get attacked by mud crabs while you work on your dissertation on the dwarves? I think the topic system they also introduced in that patch was a much more effective means, as it allows you to find all the information you have kept entries on in one location, giving the player easy access to old information without making it too easy for players on autopilot. Anyways, Milo's missing and we need to find her. Her note is pretty explicit. She's tied up at the Ministry of Truth. She left a few levitation potions for me and wants me to bring some divine intervention scrolls. We also get directed to speak to Alvela Saram, which is one of the door guards. So, where is the Ministry of Truth? Oh, it's the currently crashing meteor hovering above the city. You know, it's a very Dunmer idea to imprison your thought criminals in a giant floating meteor instead of maybe gradually mining the thing out of the sky. This is a stealth mission, as indicated by the stealth equipment Caius happened to give us before he left. Or rather, this would be a stealth mission if anyone other than me were playing it.
What do you want? What do you want?
Die, Fetcher! Die, Fetcher!
We meet up with Milo. She's one of the prisoners up here, and she takes a scroll of divine intervention and says I need to meet her at the dissident priest monastery, Holo Amayan. And I can get there from Ebonheart through a woman named Belata Heteria. We go fishing with Belata and arrive at the monastery, which is currently closed. The shield guarding Holo Amayan only opens at dusk and dawn, a reference to Azura, so we wait until it opens and head inside. Mera thanks us for freeing her and directs us to speak with Master Barolo, who heads the dissident priests. He gives us 3 pieces of critical information: the Lost Prophecy, the 7 Curses, and information on Kagranak's tools. You might recall during our Mages Guild investigation into the disappearance of the dwarves that Kagranak and his tools had come up. Yeah, they might be important. The Lost Prophecy. I'll let you read it, and I'll discuss the big points. The first refers to being born in an ancient family, foreign to Morrowind and Dragonborn. Dragonborn in this case just refers to origins from somewhere in Cyrodiil, not the Retconia meaning where the Dragonborn are the universal chosen one format that learn the dragon language. The prophecy goes on to discuss what the Outlander incarnate will do, going beneath Red Mountain, countering the 7 curses, his star-blessed hand wielding a blade thrice cursed, to punish the unmourned, or 6th house. So, what are the 7 curses? The note we're given lists them as follows: the curse of fire, of ash, of flesh, of ghosts, of seed, of despair, and the curse of dreams. Fire and ash, it is a volcano island. Flesh is Corpus, which we've beaten. Ghosts, seed, and despair likely to refer to curses yet afflicted. And the curse of dreams refers to dreams our character as well as other people named dreamers have been afflicted with. One example being Elvil Vidron from the Temple questline, who mistakenly believed himself to be the Nerevarine. One thing I could not mention in the Tribunal Temple section was that being the Nerevarine is a potential solution to that particular quest, as you can prove that he is not Nerevar incarnate. However, this particular solution is rather confusing as it's a very short window where you would actually be able to complete the quest in this manner. Another dreamer is Varver Serethi from the Redoran questline, whom was corrupted by an ash statue into killing his friend. There are also a host of named NPCs in the world who exist as normal civilians who will gradually become dreamers as you do the main quest. What about the blade cursed thrice? This is in reference to one of Kagranak's tools, Keening. He had 3 tools, Wraithguard, Keening, and Sunder. Keening is probable as the blade as it kills any who wield it without Wraithguard. We gain some additional juicy details. According to the dissident priests, the dwarves disappeared at the same time as the Battle of Red Mountain for entirely unrelated reasons. At this time, Nerevar and Dagath went into the mountain, finding the tools as well as the Heart of Lorcan, one of the Aedra who was punished for creating mortality. Nerevar had tasked Dagath with protecting the tools and went to speak with his counselors, whose name may be familiar: Vivek, Amalexia, and Sothasil, or the Tribunal. When the Tribunal, led by Nerevar, went to Red Mountain, Dagath had apparently gone mad and refused to hand over the tools. He was driven off, and the tools were recovered. Each swore to never use the tools, but following Nerevar's timely and convenient death, the Tribunal went to Lorcan's heart and used the tools to gain divine power. Dagath eventually returned, himself also having divine power, and took control of the heart, Keening, Sunder, and the Red Mountain, and ever since then has fought a shadow war with the Tribunal Temple. Dagath is unable to quickly win as he does not possess Wraithguard, and the Temple are unable to win as they can't access the heart. The Temple thus censors the dissident priests, the Nerevarine cult, and the false incarnates, as there is some measure of shame felt for their inability to properly control the situation. However, the dissident priests are not against the Temple. They recognize the real enemy as still being Dagath. So, with these 3 pieces of information, we go to Nabani Mesa. This is the beginning of the second act of Morrowind, and it begins with our return to the Ursulaku tribe. We tell the lost prophecies to Nabani until she memorizes them. She then sets us down the path of completing the 7 trials. Trials 1 and 2 are done, but Sul-Matul is the one who knows of the 3rd trial. Before he will share the 3rd trial, he wishes us to pass a warrior's test by journeying to Kogarun, a 6th house stronghold. We are to acquire a Corpus Weeping, a House Dagoth cup, and the Shadow Shield. Kogarun is an extensive dungeon featuring 3 separate environments and a lot of monsters. Kogarun is a logical progression of difficulty from Ilunaby, being longer, more populous, and far from resupply. I suspect many will have given up on Morrowind long before now. If Alunaby was the final test, Kogarun is the job you get after graduation. It really is a great dungeon. Upon our return to Sul-Matul, he tells us the riddle of the third trial. The eye of the needle lies in the teeth of the wind. The mouth of the cave lies in the skin of the pearl. The dream is the door, and the star is the key. I wish I could experience solving this riddle for the first time again. Unfortunately, I know exactly where this riddle ends. The eye of the needle is our objective. The teeth of the wind refers to a coastal entry point into the island. The skin of the pearl is the most obscure part, but it is supposed to refer to a bright rock that can guide you. This quest is one of the reasons I disagree with the sentiment people, including the Skywind devs, have about waypoint markers. In particular, that if you don't like them, you can simply turn them off. The problem with that sentiment is that when games get frustrating, if you suffer through, there is an eventual sense of catharsis at solving a puzzle. However, if the option to have the answer shown to you is always available, then when the moment of frustration arrives, rather than earning that sense of catharsis, you take the easy way out. I know this to be true because it is something that happens to me as well. I liked the game Dishonored a bit. I know it's a non sequitur, but it took me a while to understand why people I knew didn't like the game, until I realized I had made a change in the menu options that most people had not. I was given a good piece of advice before starting the game to turn off the waypoints. This made the game way more interesting, since I was fully exploring the levels and actually finding my objectives, not just following a waypoint. The only reason it works for Dishonored and not other games, however, is that Dishonored is a fairly linear game that also specifies directions to locations in the game, whereas most modern games rely on waypoints because there simply isn't time to do that in development. Now imagine Morrowind with waypoints. A lot of the quests I've described in this line, as well as in the other parts, immediately begin to suffer because of a lack of intrigue, and a lack of catharsis for figuring it out. Not just the big quests like this, where the whole point is to discern a location based on a riddle, but other quests, like the quest to find Telfir during the Cure, or how about the quests to find the informants? They become a lot less interesting if you have a waypoint leading you directly to the source. The Cavern of the Incarnate, once found, can only be entered at the hours of dusk and dawn, a staple for Azura.
In the dawn hour under Azura's star, the door is opened.
Inside is a statue of her, and a ring within her hands. This triggers a cutscene.
Nerevar reborn, incarnate. Your first 3 trials are finished. Now, 2 new trials lie before you. Seek the Ashlander, Ashcans, and the Great House Councillors. 4 tribes must name you Nerevarine. 3 houses must name you Hortator. My servant, Nabane Mesa, shall be your guide. And when you are Hortator and Nerevarine, when you have stood before the false gods and freed the heart from its prison, heal my people and restore Morrowind. Do this for me, and with my blessing.
Sadly, Moon and Star is somewhat underpowered. It's a constant effect that fortifies personality and speechcraft 5 points. It's meant to signify 2 things: Nerevar's supernatural power of persuasion and proof of identity. Most people won't care or acknowledge if we wear the ring, and said supernatural power pales in comparison to the power of the bribe. I mean, really, you couldn't have afforded the legendary Ring of Nerevar to be absolutely ridiculous, like 25 or 50 points fortified? There are random items given to us by previous incarnates who were not the Nerevarine with more use than Moon and Star, like these levitation bands. From here on, Morrowind's questline becomes non-linear. The next obvious step in what I did would be to return to the Ursulaku, inform them of what happened, and seek to be declared their Nerevarine. Sul-Matul grants us this title, and Nabani, although Azura labeled her our guide, only really has some basic information for moving forward, after which we never have to speak with her again. Important to note, however, is that from here on, the temple and House Redoran become somewhat hostile, as we are being persecuted as a false incarnate. Thus, let us begin the journey of becoming Hortator and Nerevarine. Starting with House Halau, I ask about the Hortator in Balmora and get given a book with all the council members listed, and for a 50 gold bribe, I get directed specifically to Uncle Curio. These Hortator quests are going to have a lot of overlap with the house quests themselves. I enjoy this aspect and appreciate the effort. Whether or not you are a member of one of the houses, or even its leader, has an impact on how these quests proceed. If you are the leader of a house, then you are pre-qualified to be their Hortator. But remember that they are also exclusive, so you still have to experience the other two. I go to meet Crassius Curio and ask to become Hortator. If you have a disposition of 70, something I was just too short of,
What is it, peasant? I am not amused.
He is willing to vote for you in exchange for a kiss. Otherwise, it costs 1,000 gold. What I like about the Hortator quests is that it introduces you to the cultures of the factions you're meant to be representing, in a way that is consistent with the culture of the faction. Hello in particular will involve a great deal of bribery and political manipulation, something that also happened a great deal to Rethin. One thing I had considered doing for this video, since I was on PC and have some experience with the editor, was making a small mod that put my custom characters as faction leaders who would name us Hortator in order to skip any redundancies, since for the most part the Hortator process is nearly identical to the endgame questlines of each great house. Becoming Halau Hortator will entail finding the counselors and gaining their vote. Drambero will vote for you if you manage to find him, although at least this time we don't have to bare-knuckle cage match his pet Nord. Yingling Half-Troll asks for money, which I oblige him, but Crassius suggested we kill him. The remaining two counselors, Nirvana Ules and Valanda Amani, are under the control of one Orvis Dren. This part of the quest will be new material since my conversation with Dren goes a bit differently than Rethin's conversation did. I tell him I want to become Hortator to defeat Dagath and he attacks me, saying the Tribunal betrayed the Dunmer when they signed the armistice with the Empire, and that Dagath had already made him a better offer. You can actually convince Orvis to peacefully support you, but considering Orvis Dren is responsible for a lot of suffering on Vardenfell, and he doesn't recognize that Tiber Septim was as powerful as the Tribunal when they signed the armistice, my decision was easy.
There is no escape. Die.
After which, Ulas and Amani are receptive to the idea of supporting us, and with that, Crassius names us Hortator. Something I'll note is that each of these Hortator and Nerevering quests gives a unique magical item, like the Halau Belt of the Hortator that gives a constant 20-point magicka bonus, but a lot of them aren't really notable and I did not use them. Our next stop was to House Redoran in Aldrune. I know it's kind of late to ask, but is the correct spelling with an apostrophe or a dash? In order to become Redoran Hortator, we need to figure out if any of the counselors can get our foot in the door. Most will be hostile to the idea, but through process of elimination, you'll eventually meet Athen Serethi, who will say that all but one council member will support us, Bolvin Venom. But first, he wants us to rescue his son, Varver Serethi, from Venom Manor. This is similar to the Redoran version of events, except I was a lot more violent than Jibindaris was. Serethi says that if we defeat Bolvin Venom in an honorable duel, that the other counselors will find no reason not to support us as Hortator. These honor games are an important part of Redoran culture, but they are just as willing to commit duplicitous acts. Serethi certainly stands to gain politically from us taking care of Venom. The other counselors are willing to support us as Hortator, despite everything, because we are willing to fight Dagath, and thanks to Serethi's good word. Minor Erebar mentions that there were rumors of us being an Imperial spy, which is simply ridiculous. And so, after gaining the support of the counselors, we confront Venom, and he initiates the duel challenge. This means going out of our way to go to the Vivek Arena, because why would a faction that frequently has honor duels be host to an area to have said duels? And because of course this game is going to pit us one last time in the arena. Things go a bit differently on PC than they did on Xbox. Anyways, Serethi now confirms us as Hortator and gives us a sealed package. The note basically says that while we are committing high acts of heresy, the temple holds that if we are acting in the best interest of Vardenfell and are able to become Hortator and Nerevarine, then I can present myself to Archcanon Serioni for a private meeting. Telvanni's Hortator process is a little different from its questline. Like the other houses, the council has to unanimously agree on the appointment. For the Telvanni questline proper, however, Uferith never actually had to meet the entire council. As is custom with House Telvanni, one potential solution to becoming Hortator, should a councilor not support me, would be to simply kill them. I believe you can do this in any order, but Master Arion is the only unconditional vote, and he's willing to explain the other councilors for you. Master Neloth has an ill temper, probably from those muck-based ointments his mouth keeps using. Mistress Taratha hates men, Mistress Thorana is crazy, and Archmagister Gothrin will stall indefinitely for no reason, likely needing to be killed. An outcome Arion admits is beneficial to him. I've already said this before, but each counselor lives atop a tower that can only be accessed with a levitation effect. So even without doing the Telvanni quests, you have to engage in this quirk of Telvanni society. Neloth is receptive to us being Hortator in exchange for a 1,000 gold bribe and also us going away. Thorana confirms us as Hortator provided we perform a party trick for her. Dratha, even after a few thousand gold in bribes, isn't too receptive on account of our masculinity.
Now you die!
And with that, Arion gives us the useless Robe of the Hortator, a simple questline, but fully reflective of Telvanni culture. Now we're starting on the 3 remaining tribes that must name us Nerevarine for the trials to be complete. We start with the Ahomessa tribe, who live in the Grazelands near the coast. One of the tribesmen recommends I speak to one of the Gulakans. They pass me up to the Wise Woman. Apparently, the Ahomessa have no Ashcan, so she speaks for the tribe. She is willing to name us Nerevarine. However, the Ahomessa are in need of a safe place. Whenever the Ahomessa have been threatened, she says they would go to Alt Daedroth. It's worth noting that this is a low-key admission that the Ahomessa are Daedra worshippers, but now a full-time Shigarath cult have taken up residence in the shrine. I am to go to Alt Daedroth and make it safe. What defines safe can actually vary. In another Elder Scrolls game, safe would be the complete and utter annihilation of the current population. Alt Daedroth, much like in the Temple questline, is currently in a state of war between a group of Ordinators and some Shigarath worshippers. I love when the game intersects questlines like this. It just as easily could have picked another unused Daedric ruin to set this quest. You want another one? Well, one of the later Mages Guild quests has you setting up a meeting with this same Ahomessa Wise Woman. Here I run into and have to talk with Ordinators who want me dead. What makes this quest interesting is that I can speak with the leader of the Shigarath cult, and he can be convinced, or coerced, into allowing the Ahomessa to use Alt Daedroth as a refuge. In fact, all these Shigarath worshippers are named NPCs, unlike other games that would simply name them cultists or bandits or what have you. It was post-Morrowind and Tribunal that Bethesda went back to using generic names for enemy NPCs. So begins the process of us demonstrating the safety of Alt Daedroth. Now the ruin is across the water from the tribe, but luckily the Wise Woman can water walk. Funnily enough, she's also a spell creator, and since I know Fortify attribute, I cook up a little Fortify speed spell to make this go by quicker. This proceeds to immediately backfire when she gets distracted by an underwater enemy she can never reach and goes sprinting off into the sunset at high speeds.
Welcome to my sweet assistant friend. To this place where destiny is what you come. Never a bar, friend, or
Stranger, come and look upon my heart. I wait with complicated on your neck, sweet son. What a grand it is.
get the pulse under. So naive, shame on you, moon and song. They got her, and I'm a dog. There's no escape. So come to me and bring Rhaegar through fire and war where we last met.
I'd still be charging.
Oh, come here.
After a few minutes, we arrive, and having proven the shrine's safety, relatively at least, Sinemu is willing to make us the Ahomessa Nerevarine. Deeper into the interior of the Gracelands is the Zainab tribe. To quote one of their own tribesmen, "Our great chief does not stand on ceremony." Indeed, the Ashcan doesn't care as much as others about going through the Gulakans or thoughtful gifts. We met the Zainab during the Halau questline. He's skeptical of the idea of an outlander being the Nerevarine, so he dispatches us to deal with a vampire named Calvario. And that's that.
I have no more quarrel with you.
Open NW, way more stable than vanilla. Anyways, Kashad is thrilled we killed Calvario, and sensing the opportunity to take advantage of an unwitting hero, something I'm surprised didn't happen more often, gives us his most ridiculous request to mind. He wants us to find him a high-born Telvanni bride, a pretty one with big hips, and bring her back for marriage. He suggests I go to the Telvanni lords, well, the ones left anyways, and inform them of the significant political opportunity of marrying off one of their daughters. He wants us to consider the many daughters offered and choose for him the finest, and suggests we consult the wise woman to learn of his tastes. Sonemu, the wise woman, is realistic. No Telvanni lord is going to marry their daughter off to an Ashlander, Ashcan or otherwise. I don't think any of the Telvanni lords are even specified to have children. Instead, and I want you to listen until I say otherwise, instead, we are to go to her friend Seville Amain, a slave mistress at Tel Arun, buy a slave, dress her up as a member of high society, and bring her back to the camp and present her to Kashad as a highborn Telvanni bride, because he won't know the difference. Alright, you can pause the video and leave your comments now. Of the more morally dubious things we've done in this questline, I'd say this is about as worse as it gets, and it's kind of unnecessary. Of the Nerevarine quests, this tribe is the longest, most intricate, and pointless. You already had the Calvario quest, just make that one more complex. I guess the point is that in order to save the day, we have to engage in a little local culture slavery. Anyways, the slave in question doesn't really seem to mind the situation. We get her some nice clothes and Telvanni bug musk, which fortifies personality, and escort her back to the village. She's happy to have nice clothes, and she is technically going to be set free, even if that is into a life of rearing children. Kashad's impressed, and names us Nerevarine for our work. I think this is what Goodall was complaining about when it came to Rolston's writing being more grounded in historical parallelism. Generally speaking, Merrick societies have different conceptions of personal relationships and reproduction, on account of their longer lifespans. The Dunmer are the type of culture that would focus on trying to produce higher quality children, rather than a higher quantity like the races of men do. This is also the game's only instance of a non-beast race being enslaved, which is technically canonical. The Telvanni were supposed to keep slaves of all races, even the Dunmer, but Rolston was the one exploring that idea with this quest and the John Hawker character, while Goodall seemed to maintain the idea that only the beast races were being enslaved. Of the four tribes, the Arabinisum are the least plussed about the Nerevarine. One of the tribespeople suggests we skip talking to the Ashcan and Gulakans and go straight to the Wise Woman, as the Khans see the prophecies as foolish superstition. The Wise Woman says as such. The Ashcan, Ulith Paul, hates Outlanders, and she says that he is a bad leader. She says that while he is the Ashcan, the Arabinisum will love war and hate Outlanders. So, in order to change things, we need to kill the leadership of the tribe and install Han Amu, one of the more peaceful Gulakans, as Ashcan. I go to Ulith Paul, who makes the mistake of attacking me when I mention the Nerevarine prophecies, and so I'm forced to kill the leadership of the tribe. Then, the wise woman has me go to Han Amu, who accepts the artifacts I collected from the other Khans and becomes Ashcan, and he names us Nerevarine of the Arabinisum. What I find funny is the bleed over of gameplay elements into the story. We give him an axe that boosts his strength, an amulet that boosts his willpower, and a robe that boosts his intelligence, and then boom, he's stronger, bolder, and smarter. That said, this is also the most undercooked of the Nerevarine quests. Its simplicity, I suspect, can be owed to the remoteness of the camp, and the general undercookedness nature of the region the camp is in. The only real crossover with the tribe is the Legion quest, where they let a missionary get kidnapped by the Mabragash. And so, in a short span, we have become Hortator of 3 houses, Nerevarine of 4 tribes. The Hortator quests give us a taste of the houses we represent, while the Nerevarine quests introduce us to the value system of each tribe. It's not lost on me that the number of factions in this section is the same as the number of Daedra in the traditional Dunmer pantheon. 3 houses for the anticipations, and 4 tribes for the 4 corners. While the houses are pretty straightforward, I for the life of me couldn't tell you which tribes are meant to correspond to which Daedra. While the synopsis of the section was short, it's important to note that the player is expected to complete all 6 of the other faction quests completely independently of any specified direction. You have to figure out where to go, who to talk to, by yourself. So for someone doing this for the first time, assuming they aren't using any kind of guide, this series of quests will genuinely take some time. Or, if you're level 20 and have 50 reputation, you can entirely skip this phase. Level 20 is easy, a few of my Xbox characters like Indaris got there, but 50 reputation will require playing a significant number of the factions to reach it. It's actually more work to complete the quest in this way, but it's nice to see the game rewarding general heroics as a potential avenue, even if it's at odds with my general distaste towards characters who are used to complete all of the content. And so, we start the 6th trial. Kicking off the beginning of the 3rd act of Morrowind, we start by heeding the message of the Archcanon and meeting with Dancel and Dolus, who informs us of a method to sneak into the private quarters of the Archcanon Tholer Sarioni. The Archcanon lays out the situation. The temple is duty-bound to oppose false doctrine, and our association with the Empire has hurt our credibility. Yet we have been chosen Hortator and Nerevarine, and the temple is now in crisis with Dagathur, failing to protect Vardenfell from the growing 6th house threat. This is represented by the number of dreamers across the island, and the number of quests and other factions that involve the 6th house. The situation is bad, and Sarioni informs us that the best person to talk to would be Vivek himself, and warns us against encounters with the Ordinators.
Keep moving.
As you can see, open hostility. Thus begins our conversation with Vivek, and there is a lot to unpack here. He starts by informing us that he is ending the persecution of the Nerevarine and the dissident priests, mentioning that it was the zeal of Beryl Sala that led them down that path, a fact confirmed in the House Halau questline. Vivek will proclaim us Nerevar incarnate to all of Morrowind, and he is doing this whether we like it or not. Second, he proposes to give us Wraithguard, to do with what we wish, under oath we are free to break to defeat Dagathur and preserve Morrowind. Vivek gives us a simplified plan. We go to Red Mountain, we acquire Sunder from Viminal and Keening from Adrosal, take Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard to Dagathur, the location, find the heart of Lorkhan, and sever Dagathur's connection to the heart, ending the Blight. To do so, we have to strike the heart at least once with Sunder, 3 times with Keening, while wearing Wraithguard. Vivek is then willing to host a great deal of questions about Dagathur. For starters, he has 7 brothers who share his power of immortality, resurrecting after death at the heart. Dagathur was of the same age as Lord Nerevar. He is highly intelligent, but extremely delusional, able to invade dreams to influence the lower ranks. After the defeat of Dagathur, Vivek will have a great deal to say. For now, he is focused on protecting Vardenfell. However, there is another path that must be discussed. Morrowind has no essential NPCs. This means that any NPC whom you desire dead, or dies by some circumstance is, well, dead. This can pose an obvious problem if quest NPCs die, but isn't too big an issue because it is an exceptionally rare circumstance that an NPC's life is outside of the player's control. This circumstance I refer to are the 2 instances in earlier quests where we escorted an essential NPC through a hostile area. When people complain about essential NPCs, I understand both sides of the argument. There's a degree of player freedom that is lost when you're unable to kill whom you choose. This is especially bad when what the player considers a valid choice are told that their choice is invalid because, for the moment, that NPC is invincible. However, the other side of the issue is the more dynamic NPCs of a post-Morrowind Elder Scrolls game. A lack of essential NPCs worked for Morrowind because, again, the player has total control over when NPCs die. This is fundamentally untrue in something like Oblivion, where NPCs are beholden to schedules, or more complicated quests such as battle scenes. It is disingenuous to make the statement that Oblivion, Fallout 3, Skyrim, or Fallout 4 are better games with one simple fix, said fix being the removal of all essential flags. That said, I will say that it should always be within the player's hands to choose if NPCs may live. even if it functionally breaks the game. I would propose this be as simple as NPCs being unable to be killed unless the player delivers the killing blow. I can already hear the counter-argument. Yeah, but what if the player missed a blow and accidentally killed an important NPC? That's what saves are for. Or you can live with the consequence of being terrible at the game. Besides, such circumstances would be much, much rarer than the current situation of players realizing they lack freedom when an NPC is simply knocked down instead of killed. However, a critical piece of the design that comes with total player freedom is what I will call the Quest of Last Resort. In Morrowind, it is called the Back Door. In Fallout New Vegas, it is the Yes Man route. In Fallout 4, it is the Minutemen. In Morrowind, if an essential NPC dies, a message reads out. With this character's death, the thread of prophecy is severed. Restore a saved game to restore the weave of fate, or persist in the doomed world you have created. This is an effective means of relaying to the player that they have killed an essential character without the hard limitation of stopping the player. However, even if you get this message, it doesn't actually mean you're locked out of ending the game. In order to take the back path, it starts with how much you know or can figure out about how to defeat Daggoth-Ur. We need to acquire the unique Dwemer artifact off of Vivek's corpse. The information you need to intuit that Vivek is in possession of Wraithguard appears as late as our encounter with the dissident priests, making the back path a possibility, but honestly I consider it a high improbability that anybody actually figured out it even existed without the editor. Anyways, assuming you have killed Vivek and found the artifact, you are not told what to do next. Consulting the chief Dwemer expert, Yagrum Bagarn, is the next step. He will only help you if you have more than 20 reputation and will ask you to grab Kagranak's journal and plan book from 2 separate ruins inside of Red Mountain. But what if Yagrum Bagarn was the one you killed?
See you soon.
In speedruns of Morrowind, you can see people bum rush Keening and Sunder and using them without needing Wraithguard. If I remember correctly, this works because the deadly part of these weapons are a script that requires you hold the weapon for a certain amount of time, something they bypass with hotkeys. Another solution would be to just have so much health or active healing to mitigate the damage. In any case, should Yagrum fix Wraithguard, the artifact will require a permanent 225 point loss in health, a significant sacrifice, but will allow you to wear Wraithguard without worry. It's actually a glitch. The health loss was meant to be a check to verify the player was an appropriate level, not a sacrifice. Again, this is another basic fix. From here, you will have to figure out the basics of the plan from Vivek's library, in a set of notes in this chamber, that detail how to defeat Daggoth-Ur. So from here, both the main questline and the back door converge into the end sequence of Morrowind.
You got my attention?
The Citadels of the Sixth House is, unfortunately, where the game ultimately falls apart. The plans involve a series of raids across Red Mountain to assault the Sixth House and defeat the Brothers of Daggoth-Ur. In theory, each brother defeated will weaken Daggoth-Ur. In practice, the script is broken. Because Daggoth-Ur has not been loaded into the game yet, scripts cannot modify his stats. According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, you can visit him first, then kill his brothers. But there are some obvious thematic and priority issues with doing that. Part of the speculation surrounding this game was the theory that the Sixth House was going to be joinable. This is alluded to in the questline when we meet Dagoth Garrus. If this was the case, it was cut very, very early in development. I suspect originally we were to have met with Daggoth-Ur and made a decision regarding our allegiance at some point before now in the main questline. However, because this never happens, Daggoth-Ur is never loaded and the script doesn't work. This leaves little reason to visit the Ash Vampires beyond the artifacts they carry. While they are somewhat varied in power, none of these artifacts are so interesting that I'm tempted to drop everything to go get them. The original spirit of the quest, as was written in the dialogue, was going to be a true war with the Sixth House, involving a series of excursions into Red Mountain and complex battles with Ash Vampires. Instead, it is as simple as peeking our heads inside 2 dungeons, then walking straight up to Daggoth-Ur. The failure of this quest ultimately lets down the earlier sections of the game. It is functionally irrelevant for us to be Hortator of any house or Nerevarine of any tribe beyond ticking off an artificial box that tells Vivek we are the Nerevarine. There is a crippling sense of isolation because not even the Boyan Armigers or Ordinators stationed inside the Ghost Gate help in our quest. We are completely alone. And this crushing sense of isolation, coupled with a complete lack of reward for our efforts, undermines Red Mountain entirely. The entire game, this entire video, I have barely discussed the region that is Red Mountain, and now that we're in the principal part of the main quest, for which this large section of the map was reserved, I have almost nothing to say, because I honestly spent so little time here. In fact, I even forgot to meet the avatar of Tiber Septim that shows up at the Ghost Gate. I feel like I've automatically failed as an analyst for this, yet I honestly can't fault myself because of how disappointing Red Mountain is. If I was to propose a fix I may well work on at some point, I would start by giving the player the option to go to the leaders of each faction to ask for assistance. You could then assign each faction to one of the citadels inside Red Mountain. This would place a camp for each faction in front of the Ghost Gate, and there would be parties at each stronghold. Strongholds would be reworked to be high-level endgame content, and each Brother of Dagath would be a boss fight. By getting the help of each faction, NPCs would spawn in the stronghold to fight the forces of the 6th house, and you may even get companions from each faction to fight alongside you for a boss fight. Killing each brother would also be essential to battle Dagath, as I would buff him to be absurdly difficult to kill while his brothers still live. I would also rework their artifacts to be more useful. With these changes, becoming the wartime leader of each faction actually has a functional use. These are just ideas, so if any Morrowind fans have made it this far, please propose some ideas for me down in the comments section. And so, we go to the mouth of the volcano to confront Dagath.
Come, Nerevar, friend or traitor, come. Come and look upon the heart and the Kulakan. And bring Wraithguard. I have come to the Heart Chamber. I wait for you there where we last met countless ages ago. Come to me through fire and war. I welcome. Welcome, Moon and Star. I have prepared a place for you. Come, bring Wraithguard to the Heart Chamber. Together let us free the cursed false gods. Welcome, Nerevar. Together we shall speak for the law and the land and shall drive the mongrel dogs of the Empire from Morrowind. Is this how you honor the 6th house and the tribe unmourned? Come to me openly, and not by stealth. Welcome, Moon and Star, to this place where destiny is made.
Dagath is a location in addition to a god. Dagath, the dungeon, is a sad dungeon, functionally being a straight line from the entrance to the man himself. After Arkanthand, Alunaby, the Ursulaku Burial Cavern, and Kogarun, it's fairly disappointing. But remember that lever from Arkanthand? This is what it was preparing you for, an entire dungeon to teach the player to use a lever to open a door. Given this is our only chance to converse and the magnitude of the situation, Dagath has been given probably the broadest and longest conversation in the game in which a great many topics come up. He asks if we are truly Nerevar reborn. How you answer is up to you, and the spectrum of options is represented, from true belief that we are the Nerevarine to skepticism of the entire notion. He then asks for our intentions with the Heart of Lorkhan. And finally, he asks that, if he had offered to let us join him, would we have surrendered Kagranak's tools? After which, we're free to ask our questions of him, his plans for the Heart, the 6th House, and the Dunmer. He justifies his actions as a sovereign entity. He shares that he has little knowledge of what truly happened to the Dwemer, and his use of the giant robot in the next room. Once the conversation is over, Dagath acknowledges us as the challenger and offers us the first blow. You couldn't even get that right.
What a fool you are. Did you get the false copy of Morrowind?
Dagath is on the level of some medium-tier NPCs from Fallout New Vegas. It's hard for me to be so blunt about something I like, but it is true. It isn't until you get to Dagath, with varied conversation response options and having responses to your responses, that the missing potential of the text-based dialogue system is fully realized. There is absolutely no reason that NPCs couldn't have had more dialogue options and responses baked into the game, because it is easier to write out dialogue in a text box than it is to voice act it. It is worth stressing that the topics in the dialogue menu are meant to indicate when the player asks something. While you can ask a lot of questions, it is sadly true that the Nerevarine, like the hero of Kvatch and the Dovahkiin, are another in a lineage of protagonists who are spoken to, rather than using an active voice. And so, Dagath is defeated. If it seems strange for me to not comment on the boss fight, it's because there isn't really one. We still have to deal with the Heart. Dagath opens up his console and types in TGM in this section, so we need to focus on getting to the Heart and, I guess, destroy it.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Fool! Stop! This is the end. The bitter, bitter end.
Then Azura comes, pats us on the head while downplaying the fact that this was effectively a long-term revenge scheme on the Tribunal for killing her mortal husbando. She gives us the Ring of Azura, with a constant Night Eye and Restore Fatigue effect, which is an actual reward, and so, the main quest of Morrowind is complete.
You no longer bear the burden of prophecy. You have achieved your destiny. You are free. The Doom Duima's folly, Lord Dagoth's temptation, the Tribunal's seduction, the God's heart freed, the prophecy fulfilled. All fate sealed and sins redeemed. If you have pity, mourn the lost, but let the weeping cease. The blight is gone, and the sun's golden honey gilds the land. Hail, Savior, Hortator, and Nerevarine. Your people look to you for protection. Monster and villains, great and small, still threaten the people of Vardenfell. Enemies and evils abound, yet indomitable will might rid Morrowind of all its ills. For you, our thanks and blessing, our gift and token given. Come, take this thing from the hand of God.
The Blight is gone, the Sixth House defeated, the Sleepers awoken, and the people of Vardenfell are thankful to us for saving them from Dagoth. And like most games of this formula, nothing to do now that you have won. It's kind of a paradox with these games. On the one hand, the main plot should have been done last, a final ultimate story saving the world you've spent so much time living in. But on the other hand, these main stories are usually so pervasive and urgent you can't rationally justify ignoring them, Morrowind being the exception for reasons I've already outlined. Here's a genuine question. Would you prefer the start of a game that did everything right but blundered feet before the finale, or a game that barely stumbles its way in the beginning but competently wraps up its ending? I say this because I firmly believe if Morrowind had truly delivered in its third act, if it had justified rallying the people of Morrowind by showing them fighting alongside you against the Sixth House, if it had scaled up its difficulty to require becoming godlike in power, and in its finale it drew into question everything you have been fighting for, then I would have no hesitation in calling Morrowind the greatest game of all time. One of the mysteries of the game is the truth behind what really happened to Nerevar. The Ashlanders say that he was betrayed alongside Dagoth by the Tribunal, so that they may seize power from the heart. Vivek says that Nerevar had died naturally, and Dagoth says that Nerevar had betrayed him. This is a solid exploration of the idea of unreliable narrators, and it seems that Dagoth wants to go other routes. He challenges the morality of working for the Empire against what he believes are the best interests of the Dunmer people. But at the end of the day, Dagoth and the Sixth House are so patently evil, there is little justifiable reason why anyone would want to go inside with him. It's clear that even in the event that Dagoth had originally been a good man, who had been betrayed all those years ago, today he is insane and his desires are unconscionable. The intrigue of the main quest and the questionable actions from grave robbing to slave trading do not pay off in a reasonable or satisfying manner, and that is in part because despite the memes, and despite the dissertations written on the topic, at the end of the day, we have to work with what we have, and what we have is underwhelming. The saddest part, however, is that Bethesda, secure in their success, have never taken the opportunity to deliver on the vision behind this quest. Rallying the people of the land, undertaking ancient prophecies, and making deals with people to affect the outcome of a war. Not a final battle that decides the fate of the world, an actual war. Ironically, the closest this has come to being realized was in Fallout New Vegas, and that wasn't even a Bethesda game. Originally, I was not going to cover the plugins, and the reason is that I never really played with them outside of the Master Index plugin. But they are official Bethesda content, they're available for free download, and there is some intrigue to be mined out of them. So I booted up my main character back before we fought Dagoth. Two of them, Leifem and Adamantium, just add new armor sets for sale on Vardenfell. Adamantium armor is from Tribunal, while Le Femme is original. Adamantium was meant to alleviate the lack of an in-game medium armor set in Morrowind. I mean, Indoral armor is there, but Ordinators are scripted to get mad if you wear it, even after being proven to be the reincarnation of the guy it was named after by one of their gods. Both Tribunal and Blood Moon would try to make up for this problem before the idea of medium armor was ultimately abandoned come Oblivion. I didn't actually get Le Femme to work, so you'll just see some pictures. The plugin was meant to add more armor options for female characters, adding 2 new sets as well as female versions of Imperial Steel, Imperial Chain, Steel, and Netch Leather. But then the plugin botched it and forgot to actually implement the new models, so Tribunal ended up being the expansion to actually do it, which is why you might recognize some of these female versions even if you haven't used the plugin before. The 2 new sets are Domina and Gold Armor. We'll start with Domina, a new light armor set. It falls below Glass and the Dark Brotherhood set added in Tribunal that every character ever will have delivered to them in the form of an assassin. So, unless you want your character to look like a Moloch Ball worshipper, I'd probably pass on the set considering its stats. Gold Armor is yet another attempt to fix the issues with medium armor in the game, which is admirable, except it's not a full set. There's only 3 sets of medium armor in the base game that come with greaves, and for some reason Gold Armor came out from only the waist up. One theory is that it was meant to replace the Indoral chest and helm that get the Ordinators mad, which would be fine, but at that point you're just wearing the boots and arms of the Indoral set. And it gets better. The guy that's meant to sell it to you won't, because whichever intern they saddled this plugin on didn't set the merchant's inventory correctly. Okay, this takes some explaining. Merchants generally don't have the stuff they sell in their inventory. They instead use a container that they're flagged as owning. NPCs will wear the best armor in their personal inventory and they won't sell anything that they are wearing, so if you add a character that you want to sell, say, Daedric armor to Sidenine, and you put it in their inventory directly, they will equip it instead of selling it to you. What makes this even funnier, though, is that one of the goals of this plugin was to correct a previous mistake Bethesda had made with this same character. Cyrolus Sakis was meant to be a master armorer trainer here on Vardenfell, having a reputation as a famous smith from Cyrodiil. But they forgot to actually make him a trainer, and they didn't bundle the fix with the Tribunal, Blood Moon, or Game of the Year edition. But they did take the time to put the female armors from this plugin in, like, what? The final armor-themed plugin is the Helm of Tohan, which was a pre-order bonus if you bought Morrowind from EB Games. Yes, a 2002 pre-order DLC. And all things considered, it's not bad. You ask for the latest rumors up in Dagon Fell and you'll get a quest to go to Ernissaralis. Once there, you meet 2 brothers who have an argument that devolves into a fist fight. The winner is supposed to come with you, but the quest bugged out and both brothers ended up following me. Noticing a pattern with the bugs? Anyways, you clear out this fairly short Daedric ruin and find a chest at the end containing the Adamantium Helm of Tohan. The only point of this quest is to give you the key to this 100-point lock. As far as the helm goes, it's a standard adamantium helm whose sole notable property is its high enchant value, higher than even the Daedric faces, meaning that you can make it one of the most powerful artifacts with the right enchantment. The Entertainers plugin adds the ability to make a small amount of cash from providing entertainment to the patrons of the 8 Plates in Balmora, which is the same bar where Indaris killed that Halal noble. Considering the most you get paid is 100 gold and it's dependent on your skills and items, it's a neat concept, but it's not really a standout. Bitter Coast Sounds adds a bunch of sound files to the Bitter Coast. Area Effect Arrows adds a new shop of effect which specializes in enchanted ranged weapons that do area of effect damage, and nothing else, which will come in handy for the Siege of Firemoth plugin should you choose to use them. Siege of Firemoth adds a new island and quest centered around taking back an old Imperial fort that's being held by a Lich. It's a neat concept, but in execution it's a good example of the merits of restraint and level design. You meet
Solus Gravius
at Sidenine, who dispatches you to lead a small task force of heroes across the island chain. Don't get attached, they're all gonna die from a literal horde of skeletons. There are no less than 4 skeletons per pack. The only challenge of this mod was avoiding the temptation to recall to go get more magicka. Get into the keep proper and you find this room. What purpose this room served before the skeletal takeover is a mystery. Then there's this room with no less than 30 rats all infected with Witbane. Good thing we caught Corpus last episode. You go through the caves with a ludicrous amount of ebony before arriving at the final boss area. This is an unbreakable force, unstoppable wall kind of situation. The Lich has endless health and magicka pools, and I have an absurd amount of spell absorption and magicka resistance. I can't do enough damage to bypass his regeneration since all my spells were designed to damage over time, and he can't consistently damage me enough to pose a substantial threat. All he does is cast spells which 75% of the time I absorb into my magicka pool I then heal with. Alright, let me break this down. Generally, Morrowind's level design was structured around a small number of enemies who posed a large amount of threat to the player. This was to work around Morrowind's mechanics. Stealth-focused characters are going to be even more useless here than ever before. Spellcasters will run out of magicka fast, and warrior characters will get body blocked by sheer numbers. There's no items in the environment to help the player. No potions, no scrolls, no tools. Firemoth is only difficult on account of the fact that it's radically different in design from the rest of the game, and it's more of a tedious kind of difficulty where I just started dodging and running around all the enemies instead of fighting them. The end reward of this plugin is the Ward of Akavir, which isn't even a new item. It's just a dragon scale shield with a constant fortify 25 point effect. This whole plugin is a waste of time. No, wait, better. Its primary usage is something that can be pointed to as an example of how not to design a dungeon. Alright, now let's turn this around with a plugin that should have been in the Game of the Year edition. The Master Index plugin is a rework of the propylon system of the base game, which I talked about all the way back in part 2. The original idea of the system was to have a circuit of teleporters activated by keys found in the environment of Morrowind. In practice, nobody ever explains the concept to the player, and most characters are generally lucky to only find a couple during their adventures. The Master Index plugin fixes this by adding a quest that will have you finding every index and creating a Master Propylon index that can be used to teleport to every Propylon chamber. It's a nice and simple quest line. Fulms Morel in the Caldera Mages Guild will dispatch you directly to each index's location. He's a little clairvoyant, and the quest could stand to have a little more instances of the player actually having to figure out their locations. My other gripe is that once you turn in an index, it's gone, even after completing the master index. So the old function of teleporting chamber to chamber will be replaced with teleporting to Caldera, which can be a problem for the criminally inclined. This rounds out all the official Bethesda content not included in the physical Game of the Year edition. So let's get into the proper expansion content with Tribunal. We're back to our main character following the downfall of Dagoth Ur. I have mixed feelings on Tribunal. When I think about it casually, that's when I have feelings of nostalgia about my time there, but when I think about it more analytically, I start to see the flaws really quickly. The first, which is an endless source of hilarity for me, is the issue with the Dark Brotherhood assassins attacking you literally out the gate when you start at Morrowind. This is actually fixed somewhat on the Xbox Game of the Year edition, where the events will only happen after level 6, but on the PC copy, to this day, it remains unpatched. But we do finally get to answer as to why the assassins are coming after us.
Hey there.
It starts with us reporting the attack to the guards, who gives us some vague directions to some guy in Ebonheart. Apelles Mattius is the man, and he points to the mainland being the likely suspects, though he doesn't mention that the local Dark Brotherhood chapter happened to get wiped out recently. Anyways, we use a teleporter guide person who can transport us to Mournhold on the mainland, and you can get teleported back at no cost. It's a bit of a cheap workaround to get us to the city, but I'll let it slide. The first striking thing about the city is the architecture. It's quite different, and I attribute it to the changes in color palette, from adobe browns to brighter teal greens and maroon reds. You'll also notice that the city is open-air interior cells, something that isn't present in the base game but would become a staple of cities in subsequent Elder Scrolls games. Is Tribunal an expansion or an extension? I think it's a good question. I would say Blood Moon is undeniably an expansion, while some of the plugins like the Master Index or Fort Firemoth are DLC. It would only be a few years later that Bethesda would be trying to sell horse armor and have 13 different pieces of DLC for sale in Oblivion, but is Morrowind just behind the magical distinction? I certainly remember the days when this content was made available physically. I actually had an original base game on PC, and I remember seeing copies of Tribunal and Blood Moon being sold in stores. My current copy is a slightly older Game of the Year edition, but yes, my Zoomer friends, there was an internet before 2007, and yes, the content was downloadable. I don't think Tribunal has a lot of the connotations other DLC carry, even by Bethesda standards. We'll see though. The entire DLC takes place in the city of
Mournhold, city of light, city of magic.
Yeah, that. Anyways, the city is divided into smaller districts, the main areas being God's Reach, the Great Bazaar, and the Temple Courtyard. Most of the NPCs have new, unique dialogue. In fact, a lot of people have voice acting relevant to their situations.
Vec, that's strange. I suppose it's possible that my master knew this man, but being an Ashlander and my master being of the House of Telvanni, well, if you'll pardon me for being flippant, Sergio, I don't think they would be friends.
That said, a lot of people also really only play one part in one quest, barring some of the major players in the city. I didn't really do a whole lot of side questing in Tribunal, so I'll be focusing on the main Tribunal content. And yes, I am aware of the High Luck Wood Elf quest. Our main focus for now will be looking for the Dark Brotherhood, and that leads us into the sewers. One of the immediately apparent problems with Tribunal is that if a quest requires or involves combat in any fashion and it can't justifiably happen on the surface, then it gets relegated to the sewers, and I'll be honest, the sewers are just awful. A detail about Tribunal is, rather than being scaled to Vardenfell, it's designed to be played by people who have beaten the main quest of Morrowind. This has the hilarious knock-on effect of making the people of Mournhold appear to be much stronger than the people of Vardenfell. So, not only are the common enemies on average as tough as some of the bosses in the previous part or even heads of factions from Vardenfell, they're also in a confusing mess of an area. The sewers are dark and enclosed, their layout is not intuitive, often the structured parts break off into repetitive cave networks. It is very easy to get lost, and if something involved the sewers, I would just consult the wiki. Once you do find the Dark Brotherhood hideout and fight through the assassins, you'll encounter Dandrus Volus. Dandrus Volus is higher level and has more health than Dagoth Ur. Let that sink in for a moment. This is an example of vertical progression, where rather than providing more content for the player to explore laterally, it is providing a higher level of challenge for players to go through. It makes a degree of sense considering Tribunal is meant to be played after Morrowind, sure, but it, dare I say this, justifies the scaling system of the later games. Azura, forgive me. Nonetheless, enemies becoming tougher isn't actually a problem. Enemies becoming tougher in conjunction with an ugly area that isn't fun to explore or fight in and is difficult to learn or map out is a massive problem. Anyways, we're done flying blind now as we have found a contract that's marked with the letter H. Guards will direct us to Tyanius Delician, who will admit that it was the new king, Halau Helseth, who ordered the hit, and he doesn't really care. The Tribunal questline is a bit confusing. I would say it provides options, but in reality, 6 of the quests can be skipped just by going to another quest giver early. We investigate rumors surrounding the new king, investigate the temple, investigate the guards, investigate the dead king's widow, investigate some journalists, then meet the Queen Baronzia, who suggests we go up to the temple and meet Fedrus Halir. I went through these quests quickly because, and I'll be blunt here, there's not much substance to them. I actually completed all of them in under half an hour. They don't make much sense to do, considering Delician will blow you off for asking about the Dark Brotherhood attacks. In any case, thus begins the real questline of Tribunal, up at the temple. Fedrus Halir wants us to track down a goblin army being prepared by the king and wants us to kill 2 war chiefs and their Altmer trainers. This involves going down into the sewer. Our next task involves escorting a temple priest so that he may cleanse a shrine in the sewer. Now we need to track down a powerful Lich Barrelzar who has taken up residence in the sewers. Seriously, I'm tired of this joke, but we really are tasked 3 times back to back with going deep into the sewers. The first involving a convoluted maze, the second an escort quest, and the third another ludicrous lich fight. After a period of 24 hours, the main plaza is attacked by strange mechanical creatures. We go to aid the Ordinators and Royal Guards in defending the city, after which the Royal Guards direct us to Delician and the Ordinators direct us to Halir. Both ask us to investigate a hole that has opened in the plaza, inside which is a Dwemer ruin where the new Fabricant enemies are battling the Dwemer occupants. This is where a choice is presented to the player, but not really. The issue is in whether you chose to speak to an Ordinator or a Royal Guard. I happened to speak to an Ordinator and was directed to Halir. If I had spoken to a Royal Guard and gone to Delician, our next 2 quests would have been different. This is an awkward attempt to introduce branching quest lines done very, very poorly. It is not a conscious decision of the player which path they want to take, but a chance the player is unaware of based on the costume the guard they're speaking to is wearing. I really hope that Bethesda didn't shy away from writing branching quest lines because of this. Going to the temple has us meeting Amalexia, one of the Tribunal gods whom wishes to squash a new cult, the End of Times. No, you guys are 2 centuries early. Its leader reveals a path to enlightenment, which angers Amalexia. So she has us use a Dwemer weather machine deep within the newly revealed ruin to create ash storms in the city. Now the Dwemer dungeon is big and pretty alright, but it's a bit of an obvious logical leap for people to assume freak weather must be a subsequent punishment for a minority of people forming a suicide cult. Doubt is forming about Amalexia, however. People in the temple are scared of her, and one of her hands has become frustrated and is wandering God's Reach. We have to fight him, and he is a tough fight because he introduces the rarely used concept of NPCs utilizing health potions. And Amalexia rewards us with a choice of 3 pretty decent abilities. Amalexia, now believing us to be Nerevar incarnate, tells us of 2 blades, Hope's Fire and True Flame. Both blades were a gift from the King of the Dwarves, Dumak, whom Nerevar had allied with against the Nords. Hope's Fire was her blade, and True Flame was the blade of Nerevar. It was lost at the Battle of Red Mountain, but she has found a piece of it. She suggests we rebuild the sword. One piece is at the Museum of Artifacts and can only be acquired if we donate 2 artifacts to the museum. The other piece, we're told, is in possession of Karod, one of the King's Guard. We duel Karod. He's tough but fun. Then Helseth asks me to work for the temple to gather information about them. Yeah, this branching questline really worked out, huh? If you're confused, the game seems to think we've just arrived from the courtyard section and is telling us to do the quests that lead to this point where we get the quest to duel Karod. With both pieces found, we find a craftsman. This is a famous city, so one Yagak Rogluk, a master smith, lives in town and he can fix the blade, but he wants to also restore the enchantment. We dive into the ruin, meeting the ghost of Radek Stungenthumbs, a Dwemer who asks us to get some Pyroil tar for the blade. We find some tar off a Dremora lord deep in the ruin, which was a fun little dungeon. With the tar and blade, we have reforged True Flame, and Almalexia congratulates us. Almalexia then tells us of Sotha Sil, whom she claims has gone mad, is behind the attack, and has become a danger to all of Morrowind. True Flame is capable of killing Sotha, and it's up to us to stop him. We're transported to the Clockwork City, stuck here until we escape, and so begins. The Clockwork City, unlike the labyrinthine sewers or repetitive Dwemer ruins, is actually an interesting dungeon, and a suitable and logical progression in difficulty for a character who, reasonably, will have completed the main quest. This includes the monstrous Imperfect, a giant mech boss fight. Finally, we get to Sotha Sil, and guess what? He's dead.
Nerevarine. Here it ends. This Clockwork City was to be your death. You were to be my greatest martyr, the heroic Nerevarine, sacrificing all to protect Morrowind from a mad Sotha Sil. But you live. You live. Fear not. I will tell the tale myself when this is done. I will tell my people how with your dying breath you proclaimed your devotion to me, the one true God. Your death will end this prophecy and unite my people again under one God, one faith, one rule by my divine law. The puppet king will lay down his arms and bow to my will. Those who do not yield will be destroyed. The mazed band has allowed me to travel to this place. Here I slew Sotha Sil. Here I summoned the Fabricants to attack Mournhold. I will be the savior of my people. I alone will be their salvation. None may stand in my way. Not you, and certainly not Vivek. He is a poet, a fool. I will deal with him when I have finished with you. And Sotha Sil. He always thought himself our better, shunning us, locking himself in his hole. He spoke not a word as he died, not a whisper. Even in death he mocked me with his silence. But I think you will scream, mortal. For now you face the one true God.
Her loss of divinity has had a negative effect on her. She's a tough cookie, but once she's dead, we get her sword, Hope's Fire, and use the mazed band of Barrelzar we got from one of the sewer quests to teleport back to Mournhold.
You have done well, mortal. The death of Almalexia is a boon for all of Morrowind, though it may take time for this to be understood. She would have betrayed the Dhamma as surely as she had betrayed all those whom she loved. This was her curse and her undoing. Weep not for Sotha Sil. He shed his mortality long ago, and I am certain his death was no small relief to him. These gods lived with the burden of a power no mortal was meant to possess. Your work in Morrowind is not finished, Nerevarine. Vivek still lives, but I believe his time grows short. Protect my people. Defend these lands. The skies of Mournhold are clear once again. Let these people suffer no longer. Now go, mortal. Embrace your destiny and go with my blessing.
Helseth will give us a full set of this Royal Guard armor for doing the job, and thus ends Tribunal. I posed a question near the start of this about whether Tribunal is an expansion or an extension. Tribunal is solidly an extension, and there's nothing wrong with that, while Blood Moon is an expansion, and we'll get to that. Tribunal is unique among Bethesda DLC as they generally aren't sequels to the main story. Almalexia was the wife of Nerevar after all, so her absence from the base game was somewhat strange, especially considering she tends to be the one that personally handles matters of war in modern Dunmer culture. Part 6 ended on a sour note due to the final quest at Red Mountain. That was purposefully taken out of context of what would happen in Tribunal. Tribunal is a continuation of Morrowind, providing a somewhat satisfying gameplay and even story conclusion that Dagothur in the 6th house was lacking. However, Tribunal is also reliant on you having played Morrowind's main quest to work. Play either in a vacuum, and they don't function. You can wave away Almalexia calling you the Nerevarine as part of her being mad if you haven't done the main quest, but then it's hard to really care or understand Almalexia's motivations if you don't know about the mystery behind what really happened to Nerevar and why she's diminished in power. Without Tribunal, Morrowind just ends. You never get a resolution for two of the Tribunal gods, and you don't really have any activities to complete as Nerevarine. Part of the reason I think most who enjoy Morrowind don't have an issue with its finale is that for the most part, Tribunal is the real finale of Morrowind's main quest. Even with that context, however, Tribunal has some fatal flaws. Being limited to the interior of the city means that the area doesn't have a lot of options for places to send the player, hence the mini quests that involve going down into the sewers. I think another missed opportunity would have been continuations for various factions from the base game. For instance, how interesting would it be to see some extra quests from Redoran and Halau related to the recent succession of King Helseth? Or some Telvanni quests where they are the political underdogs. The Imperial Legion and Cult could have had some representation, and there would have been some obvious opportunities for the Tribunal Temple, or a return of characters who left at the end of their quest lines like Jim Stacy and Inu Halau. Or how about some new factions, like an opportunity to learn more about House Dress and House Endoral. House Dress, as Daedra worshippers, would have been a perfect opportunity to explore what would become the reformed tribunal of post-Morrowind, that being Boethia, Mephala, and Azura. I would have preferred getting to explore their culture rather than the Helseth stuff. He's mostly just here so his mom can pay lip service to Daggerfall anyways, and while that's fine, his presence is just annoying, because he makes at least 3 attempts on the Nerevarine's life and we're just supposed to be cool with it. I get that the idea was that he was being proactive and taking out any potential political threats. Tribunal, however, also doesn't really work without Morrowind. I mean, literally, yes, but for example, you could theoretically just teleport up to Solstheim and start playing Blood Moon. It'd be challenging at the start, but it's possible and it makes sense. Tribunal's linked to Morrowind in such a way that it can't stand on its own despite its best attempts. I think what beautifully ties Tribunal together is that after slaying Almalexia, every NPC in the game is given a topic about her and you can inform them about her death, and even you killing them. And those NPCs, regardless of their beliefs on the matter, will take offense at that. Yes, even Nabani Mesa, an Azura worshipper who denounces the false Tribunal, takes offense at the notion of us having killed them.
All I ask for is a pair of boots. How hard could it be?
After playing Morrowind for so long, coming to a more recognizable land of forests with wolves and bears feels alien. And unlike Tribunal, this is an open landmass. Solstheim itself is actually pretty small, the entire island being about the size of one of Morrowind's biomes. Even without the excessive speed I have, it does not take long to traverse the island. Yet it feels like a wild wasteland. There are only 3 places of refuge. In between all that is a lot of wildlife that is going to try to kill you. However, unlike Tribunal, Blood Moon eases up on the difficulty. It can still be a challenge, so you'll want some experience before you jump in, but Blood Moon isn't expecting you to have beaten or even played Morrowind's main quest. It's perfect for characters who may have just beaten one of the guilds or great houses and are looking for new content. And this is where I discuss expansions. Blood Moon is an expansion. There's a good deal of new land to explore, some new factions to play with, a lot of new items and creative quests, and 2 separate quest lines, each with branching paths and clear progression that don't rely on random and unforeseen choices. Most of the NPCs in the base game, near the start, will rattle off a rumor about Solstheim. All of them. It can be kind of annoying because the Solstheim rumors will supersede the normal rumors. They'll mention that it's a miserable land and that there's boat transport up in Kuhl that can take us there. Once we get there, we arrive at Fort Frostmoth. Both quest lines start here, and we're going to focus on the main quest line first, which is, in my opinion, the lesser of the two, although it's still a solid quest line. In this line, we meet with Captain Curious, who wants us to uncover the cause of the low morale in his troops lately. Asking the guards, it becomes apparent there's some sort of ban on liquor at the fort, and offering drinks reveals that the issue is that the captain ordered the fort become dry. Curious says it wasn't his decision, the alcohol just stopped coming in. He suspects the priest, who denies having anything to do with it, blaming the captain. Going to the priest's office reveals that he's been stashing alcohol for what he claims to be the benefit of the troops. I tell the captain the truth, and he congratulates us. Next, Curious is worried that some weapons are being smuggled out and sold back on Vardenfell. We have a choice of working with two of his men on the matter, and so I work with Sena Lucius. He's sort of a proto-companion that would pop up in the later games. Anyways, Lucius is useful for the investigation as he makes it easier to solve the case, but he sucks in a fight. We meet with the smith, Zeno Faustus, and he says he overheard soldiers talking about a weapon stash in a nearby cavern. Sure enough, there's some legionaries in the cave who are hostile to us. After a lot of attempts of trying to keep Lucius alive, we get to the smuggler's leader, Gualterius Spurius. What a name. And he offers to leave peacefully. I don't allow this. However, on our return to the fort, we find it has been attacked. Curious is missing, and whichever proto-companion we don't choose asks us to go to the Skull tribe on the north side of the island and ask if they know anything about the attackers. The Skull are to the Nords what the Ashlanders are to the Dunmer. This makes them a fairly distinct entity. I meet their leader, Tharstan Heartfang. Like the Ashlanders, he has issues with the Imperials, believing them to be corrupting the land. He sends us to Korst Windeye for more information. Korst gives us a copy of the story of Avar Stonesinger, and a map of the locations of the various stones around the island. In order to ingratiate myself into Skull culture, I need to complete the rituals, which involves traveling almost the entire island. This is obviously very similar to the Pilgrimages of the Seven Graces, a quest where I'm guided around the island of Vardenfell and introduced to the custom of the Dunmer people. What I don't understand is why Bethesda doesn't emulate this style of quest more often. I have mentioned the quests in the Forgotten Vale in the Dawnguard extension for Skyrim. The quest cleansing the stones from Dragonborn, however, is a perfect example of Bethesda not understanding why this kind of quest worked for Blood Moon. In cleansing the stones, you go to each of these same stones, except instead of learning about the culture of the Skull, you just shout at them and move on. The Skull test of loyalty starts with the ritual of water. We touch the stone and emulate the events as they occurred for Avar, following a black horker through a great deal of water until we arrive at an underwater cave deep below the surface. We find the waters of life bottled up and bring it back to the Waterstone. The ritual of Earth involves solving a musical puzzle inside a barrow, a Nord burial tomb with Draugr inside it. Oh boy. Draugr. The ritual of beasts has us assisting the good beast, a giant polar bear, fight off a pack of Reiklings. We either have to heal the bear or sit beside it as it heals. The ritual of trees has us assassinating a Reikling to acquire some strange seeds, making the 4 Spriggans escorting the Reikling friendly to us and taking the seed back to the clearing so that it may grow. The ritual of the sun has us encountering Grawl, strange ice creatures, and once we acquire a flaming eye from its corpse, we activate an ice wall and free the sun. Finally, the ritual of the wind involves entering another barrow to free the winds from the greedy man's bag. These rituals introduce us to the Skull and to Solstheim in a fantastic way. I cannot understate that. While the quests sound simple, and they are, there are 2 elements to all of them that make them work. The first is that you have to look at the map in your inventory rather than simply having the stones marked on your regular map. This makes the quest immediately different since it relies on you cross-referencing the general layout of Solstheim with a hand-drawn approximation of the stone's locations. The second is that you need to read the story of Avar Stonesinger in order to fully understand your objectives. Rather than following the directions of a guide character, or intuiting the directions from a waypoint marker, the point of the exercise is to emulate the actions of Avar by actually reading the story. And this contrasts nicely with the Seven Graces, as well as the quests that introduce us to each Ashlander tribe. In the Seven Graces, they are enslaved Daedra begrudgingly playing the parts you're meant to emulate over and over. For the Skull, however, it's much more naive and innocent, like the Skull culture. and its circumstances align well enough that you can emulate the story perfectly. You also meet many of the new enemies along the way, see many dungeons and side quests that you can do, and generally become more savvy to the layout of the island. It feels like completing the ritual is genuinely earning our way into the tribe in ways that the Ashlander Nerevarine quests did not. We don't just learn the customs of the tribe and do them some small favor. Obliging these people and performing their rituals shows a level of dedication the other people who have come to this island have not. Which leads nicely into our next quest. Tharstan wants us to prove our wisdom by investigating a crime. Rigmor Halfhand claims that Ingar Icemane has stolen furs from his home. You know how much I love investigations. Asking around, Ingar appears to not have any good motives. The Skaal live in a communal lifestyle, and if he needed furs, the tribe would have provided. Risi, Ingar's wife, states Ingar's innocence and claims that somebody may have framed Ingar to disgrace him, possibly Rigmor. Rigmor says he doesn't know why Ingar would steal his furs, although you will find a note in the Icemane home indicating a short affair between Risi and Rigmor. Tharstan, armed with this information, allows us to choose. We can either exile Rigmor or send him to the wolves. These are Nords, so obviously wolves are the correct option.
It'll be your blood here, not mine.
Well met.
Tharstan now asks we prove our strength, and we meet with Korst near the lake. The lake being on fire, Tharstan believes a Draugr Lord is causing this phenomenon, while Korst believes it's a sign of the Blood Moon prophecy.
You no longer bear the burden of prophecy. You have achieved your destiny. You are free.
The lie detector determined that was a lie.
We go to investigate and find the Draugr Lord, Aslip. He tells us he was a mage who became a Draugr so that he may prevent the incursion of some frost Atronachs. Don't you mean you became a Draugr in service of the dragon priests? He asks us to help, and I oblige him. We wipe out the Atronachs, and we get a cool ring from him before he embraces death, having completed his goal. Korst congratulates us on ending the threat, and we return to the Skaal village only to find it under attack by werewolves. We defend the town, and upon entering the Great Hall, we find the Honor Guard dead and Tharstan missing. Korst returns, informing us that we have contracted lycanthropy, and in 3 days will become a werewolf. How this works, considering that whole corpus thing, I don't know. We're banned from the village until cured, and this is a big choice for the questline, and unlike Tribunal, it's rather obviously a choice. If we're cured, we become Bloodskull, and further our relationship with the tribe. If we become a werewolf, we take up working for the Daedric Prince, Hirsine. Now, while we may have cured ourselves, Umbra has returned looking for more Daedric work to complete. Outside of taking the other side of the Frostmoth smuggler quest, his early stages are mostly the same, but when he's infected with lycanthropy, he chooses to become a werewolf. This is the main point the player is encouraged to become a werewolf, but you can also get infected by any of the werewolves who start wandering the island after this point. Unlike vampires, werewolves are actually well designed and playable. To start, during the day you are your normal self, but at night you transform into a werewolf with a host of set stats. You are a proper one-man wrecking crew as a werewolf, although if anyone witnesses the transformation, then your secret's out. You have to kill a human that night or you'll lose a large chunk of health the next morning. Luckily, Solstheim is rife with plenty of useless bodies to feed on, so it forms a nice gameplay loop. Wake up, quest during the day, settle down in a cave at night, and then go out hunting, then return to a cave and wake up again. Unfortunately, because Umbra was not cured, we have been exiled from Skaal society. Originally, I didn't have much to say about the first branching quest, as I had played the Skaal perspective. From their side, the quest is just to go into a tomb and fight a bunch of werewolves to retrieve a totem. Go to X, kill Y, collect Z. But for the werewolves, Hirsine dispatches us to that same cave with the objective to stop the Skaal hunters from retrieving the totem. There are over a dozen hunters to stop. They will all search the cave for the totem until they find it and will try to leave once they take it. You can even fail if they manage to successfully steal it. This quest is awesome, probably in part because the designers had a reasonable idea of how powerful the player would be due to them being a werewolf. Of course, it's easy to cheese if you just wait until your human form, but let's not. Then we're to perform the Rice Stag, a ritual to try and curry favor with the Skaal. A spirit bear has been summoned, and we need to slay it and return its heart to Korst before daybreak. The hunting pack makes like a horror movie, and we split up, even going so far as to gradually get slaughtered. I may joke, but I like this quest. It's a tad more interesting than the prior quest, where it was literally go to X, kill Y, collect Z. From the werewolf perspective, it's less interesting. You just have to track down and kill a bunch of hunters and then kill the spirit bear ourselves. It'd be cool to see the hunt from the other perspective, as the horror monster that's killing the isolated hunters. Once we return the Hard, Korst wants us to investigate another sign of the Blood Moon, a bunch of dead Horkers on the coastline. He wants us to go ask the folks over at Castle Karstag what's going on. We make our way over there and the ice castle's locked up tight. There's a back door underwater and we meet one of the people living in the castle, Krish. Krish is a Reichling. Reichlings are the true incarnation of the Aldmeri people. This message has been censored by the Thalmor. The master of the castle went missing and another Reichling, Dulk, took over. Krish tried to get a bunch of Grawl to work with him, but they isolated him to the back of the cave. We start by taking out the Grawl in the basement, then go up to the banquet hall. We meet Dulk, who affirms that Karstag is missing. Korst is worried about the situation on the island and gives us a weapon he says will be useful for fighting Grawl, not realizing Castle Karstag was the final time I was going to ever fight them. For Umbra, Hirsine sends us to go clear out a bunch of rebels at Castle Karstag. There's not really a good reason for why he cares, unless the implication is that Karstag was a Hirsine worshipper before he was a missing person. Anyways, we meet with Dulk, who asks we will wipe out Krish and all the Grawl in the basement. You don't get as clear an explanation for what's going on from the werewolf perspective, probably because the writers assumed most players would align with the Skull first. Korst tells us of the Blood Moon prophecy, the signs of which have struck the land. The first is fire from the Eye of Glass, the second is the Tide of Woe, and the third is the Blood Moon. These signs indicate the coming of the hunter, Hirsine, and his hounds, and this event happens once an era. The next time we sleep, we're awoken to a bunch of broken werewolves. This begins a long finale. This area has no escape, no resupply.
There is no escape. No recall or intervention can work in this place.
Yeah, that. Worse, the area is filled with powerful werewolves. According to the UESP, there are 31 werewolves inside the labyrinth, all of them level 70 with 700 health. Contrast this with Dagothar's immortal incarnation at level 35 with 300 health. The area is an absolute gauntlet and is very difficult. It is effectively the final gameplay test for Morrowind. To start, we encounter Captain Carius again, who wants to work together. While he serves some use as a companion, those who wish to keep him alive have a much harder time as you have to heal him. The game quickly becomes about resource management. Worse for me, it's a game of magicka management. Because I can't generate magicka through resting, and because you have to kill a dozen werewolves every level to even rest at all, I have to carefully manage my magicka throughout this entire sequence. There are no spellcasters either, and I never got around to learning the ancestral ghost summon thing to cheese some magicka back. Carefully and slowly, I have to utilize the recharge rates on my enchanted items to survive. However, the worst part is this awful sound. That sound plays whenever armor is broken, which doesn't happen often thanks to this Royal Guard armor, except there's one piece I've been wearing this entire game that has very low maximum durability, the Boots of Blinding Speed. These werewolves can destroy the boots in a single hit, and it's a chance which piece of armor gets hit, meaning my magicka, enchanted items, health, and my repair tools have to be rationed as well. The lack of space to operate in, and for this first part, trying to keep Carius alive, yeah, it's a challenge. And it's great! Eventually I make it to the center. Carius says he's going to stay behind. Tharstan's in the next maze, and he's willing to work together. He does eventually betray us though, so getting him killed is not exactly a big concern. The big issue of the maze is the cramped space makes movement very difficult. For werewolves, this area is even more difficult. Your stats are set rather than augmented by your affliction, so even though we are high level, we're far too weak to handle the hunt in our werewolf form. But, as a werewolf, we are exceptionally fast and jump really high, so we can actually just bypass all the werewolves since Umbra doesn't really care about keeping Carius alive. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until you turn human again to even stand a chance of fighting your way through the area. So while werewolves get a slightly more disappointing outing in the final quest, their earlier quests are a lot more fun. Luckily, the next area opens up. Karstag's here. He doesn't have much to say to us, just attacks us on sight. Once he's down, Hirsine shows up.
So, you are the one. You have escaped my hounds and beaten back the other challengers. I had rather expected the giant to prevail, but no matter. You have proven yourself a worthy hunter, and you have earned the greatest honor that can be bestowed upon a mortal. You are to be my prey. I ask you though, what is it that makes a hunter great? Is it his strength, the speed with which he strikes? Or is it his guile, the ability to outwit his prey? Answer me, mortal, and decide your fate. So you have chosen, and so shall be your fate. To face me in all my glory would be less than sporting. So you shall face but one of my aspects, the one you have chosen. We have little time. The blood moon sinks low in the sky. Prepare yourself, mortal, for now you are the hunted.
The whole point of this exercise was to try and determine who on Solstheim is the toughest. With the leaders of the Imperials, Skull, and Reiklings down, that leaves us, a foreigner. He wants to fight us now, but not with his full power, instead as one of his aspects. Shame is, I could have likely taken him at full power. I choose his aspect of guile and got his Spear of the Hunter, which is a cool weapon. Shame I'm out of stuff to do with it though. The Mortrag Glacier, where the whole shebang took place, breaks up. We tell Korst of our victory and defeat of Tharstan, and Carius is back at the fort. A bit of a mediocre end. The mazes were a great final challenge, but it's a shame they couldn't make Kirstein more challenging. It's also a bit of a thematic letdown. After the excellent quests introducing us to the Skull culture, the change just kinda goes off the rail and forces us into another prophecy sequence. But I said earlier this was the weaker of the two quest lines on Solstheim, and I mean that. Now I don't want to give the impression that I did these quest lines separately. Rather, they were intertwined with one another and done concurrently. So the Kirstein fight was fairly close to the end of the entire playthrough. Back at Fort Frostmoth, when we arrived at the island, I met Carnius Magius, a member of the East Empire Company, who is here on Solstheim to set up a colony at Raven Rock. He offers to let us join the faction, and our first assignment is to escort some workers to the site. It's not too far, but it is through a forest. We meet with Falco Galenis at Raven Rock, who asks we get 4 samples of ebony ore to give to Carnius in order to convince investors to fund the construction. We get paid in stock, and what follows is an interesting quest line. After a few days, Carnius will dispatch us to deal with some Nord who's raving about ruining the land, which is in line with the Skull. We need to remove him. Falco wants us to just knock him out. Carnius doesn't care. If we knock him out, Falco will pay us, and if we kill him, Carnius will pay us. After another 3 days, Carnius wants us to retrieve a shipping manifest. Falco says the ship hasn't arrived yet, and when asking around, we find out there was some light from the northwest. Checking it out, we find a shipwreck beset by Draugr and rescuing a surviving woman who returns to the camp. A few days pass, and we're given a choice. If we side with Falco, he'll want us to keep Carnius in check. If we side with Carnius, he offers to make us rich. And the choice is signposted. It's not based on something arbitrary like talking to guards. The player also understands the mechanics of both choices, unlike the Skull Werewolf choice. Which one you choose offers a different quest line. I side with Falco, while Umbra, who also happens to be invested in Raven Rock, sides with Carnius. Now, I'll be upfront. Unless I say otherwise, the quest will have gone the same for both characters. First, we're asked if the new settlement should have a smithy or a trader. I ask people and they vote trader, especially since there's already smiths on the island. Yes, that is a quest, and yes, I think I have found some Hearthfire and Fallout 4 DNA in here. Falco says that a ship captain's demanding extraordinary payment to ship our ebony ore to the mainland. We need to convince him to keep his side of the deal. Barrow here mentions his fellow ship captain Elbaroth, apparently unaware that Elbaroth crashed upshore and had his ship attacked by Draugr. Speaking with the village bicycle I rescued from said ship, she gives me Elbaroth's saber. I confront Barrow with the saber, Barrow's shook by my intimidation, and he backs down. He seems like the type to double-cross us mid-shipment, but that's the company's problem. Someone stealing ore from the mine, oh no. The most interesting part of this quest is that said thief, after being caught, ends up committing suicide in their cell after our conversation with Carnius. This is the first big departure between Carnius and Falco. Falco had us discover who was stealing the ore, while Carnius wants us to help steal the ore. We start by removing evidence from the thief's house, and then distract a guard so he can steal even more. And after a few days... Wait, let's talk about that. A fair few of these quests require real time to pass between them. I initially tried to do both quest lines at the same time, and I only got to the part where the quest branches before I had finished the main quest of Blood Moon. It is kind of like a more advanced version of the Stronghold quest from the base game, but for an entire quest line. I actually like this, even if it leads to my character just standing around for a few days. Most of my playthroughs ended with me becoming the leader of a faction in less than 1 month after joining said faction. Hell, the Nerevarine went from immigrant to incarnate in 2 months. I think if done properly, it can encourage people to branch out and play other content as time passes. If you don't use the wait function and actually go out doing dungeons, you'll probably visit most of the island by the end. People focusing down quest lines can just wait through the time. People role-playing can explore other content or fill in the time doing generated Radiant quests between bigger missions. Anyways, enough stalling. Falco says someone in the bar has been picking fights in Raven Rock. The guy's wife is outside. She asks we don't hurt her husband. He attacks us, gets tired out, and begs us to kill him. I don't. I'm not as heartless as you might think, but I am obligated to say I was compensated well for not killing him. Unlike Falco, Carnius is still willing to pay if you kill the old man. So, turns out we dug too deep and have discovered a barrow. We need to consult some local expert about some impenetrable ice entombing one of the bodies. The expert doesn't really care for us until an Imperial assassin attacks. For our help, he pays us with an ancient Nordic pickaxe and asks we bring a sample of what he calls Stahlrim back to him. We do, and he offers to create us armor and weapons from the material. I kind of already have a pair of legendary blades and the Royal Guard armor, but this is a nice opportunity to allow players who are playing Blood Moon independent of the main quest and Tribunal to keep up with the escalation in difficulty. Carnius' side quest is a lot less complicated, instructing us to go and kill the Stahlrim crafter and his apprentices, and take his Nordic pickaxe. This doesn't mean you lose access to Stahlrim weapons and armor, but as no one else is experienced in working with the material, it will take twice as much to get the items. This unfortunate consequence is unavoidable and seems like an unfair punishment. Really, the whole concept kind of flops as we're being presented with access to Stahlrim very late in the expansion. Ideally, you'd want players finding and collecting Stahlrim as they clear dungeons from the start, but I'm sure many people just sat confused at this random material they couldn't collect because they weren't smart enough to give the player the pickaxe earlier. Our next task is to deliver a report to Carnius, and I only have 5 hours to do it, and if I fail, I'm permanently expelled from the East Empire Company. What we have here is an interesting quest idea and absolutely no way of integrating it into the storyline in a way that makes sense. What about this enterprise requires a report be time sensitive? I divine intervention back to the fort, but oh no, Carnius is out walking along the beach, and his new assistant activates a trap that's supposed to slow me down if I hadn't absorbed the effect. It's a clever use of magical mechanics. Carnius is in one of 3 random locations. This is a fun little quest, but again, it doesn't make sense, unless the intended message is that Falco's working with Carnius to cut me out of my stock option. Carnius' side of the quest is interesting as it involves staging the murder of a messenger from Falco to prevent his critical message from getting out. This is the return of Heraldar, who is confirmed to have used a recall ring to escape us last time we encountered him. Anyways, Heraldar can manipulate wolves to make it look like the messenger was killed by nature. In turn, Heraldo gives us a note from Carnius, who requests we now eliminate Heraldar. I wonder if all this double-crossing is going to go anywhere. Go to X, kill Y, Spriggans, find Z roots, and poison them. If I sound exacerbated, it's because it's like the 5th time I've had to run to the bottom of the mine and then back up to the top again. Next, we need to hire some guards for Raven Rock. This involves asking everyone in town. I find 3 volunteers, and after a few days, they're equipped. I actually appreciate this quest more than Spriggan quest despite spending less time talking about it because A, I don't have to go to the back of the mine again, and B, it involves interacting with the people of the settlement. There are lots of opportunities to do this, like when we figured out if we wanted a trader or a smithy, and it's interesting to see how the characters have changed with time. A for Flaccus says that mining isn't really for him, so he's willing to try out being a guard. Garnus Uvalin says that his ambitious attitude has gotten him this far, and he figures it can get him farther. Gratian Corellius says that he was talking tough about how someone needs to protect Raven Rock and is willing to take responsibility. These characters progress, change, and maybe it says a lot about how NPCs were generally static in Morrowind more than it has a mark of quality for Blood Moon, but it's the little things like that that elevate what would otherwise be a mundane quest line. After a few days, Falco says someone's trying to kill him and asks us to protect him. Not long later, a group of Nords attack. While we prevented the assassination attempt, Umbra was assigned to take down Falco. We take position in a tower and draw a bow, signaling a mercenary to run up and distract the guards. Then we use the special arrow to kill Falco. Days after that, Falco says Carnius has received silver weapons, likely due to the recent werewolf threat, but isn't delivering them to us. Upon our return from the fort, the settlement has apparently been attacked by the Skull and the forces holed up in the mine. This is in line with the Skull, who have complained of Imperial influence on the island, but it turns out that none of them are recognizable from our encounters as we clear out the mine. We find a note indicating they are actually mercenaries. Falco has us take this information to Carnius, who confesses and attacks us. Carnius, a businessman, has more health than Dagothur. That's all I have to say on that. We kill him in self-defense, and Falco promotes us to Factor of Raven Rock, leaving us in charge of the operation. In Umbra's case, we're tasked with supplying a merc group with weapons to appear as Skull. We head out to deliver the goods and pass out the equipment, only for them to betray us and attack us. Carnius wants us out of the way. Unfortunately for him, Umbra is a lot tougher than 6 mercs. We return, and Carnius, surprised to see us, fights us. That's it for differences. We get made Factor of Raven Rock, and it's all the same from here. Now, in most games, this is where it ends, but we have one whole quest as leader, and it's literally just deciding where we want a house to be built. A house we aren't going to live out of because this is the last piece of gameplay I played for this series. Looking back, the way I describe the questline makes it sound boring. Raising a colony from nothing in a pre-scripted fashion sounds boring compared to the dynamic and radiant settlement system of Fallout 4, but on the other hand, the pre-built questline and time investment involved, including an actual stock investment that ranges in value based on how you've managed the colony, makes Raven Rock far more interesting than any of the settlements I could not possibly name for you from Fallout 4. I also like that in these 2 pieces of DLC that are steeped in prophecy and divine metaphysics, a long quest line exists where you set aside the time to participate in an entrepreneurial venture in a land that everybody else dismissed. I suspect the same way I found the Royal Palace quests and Tribunal more interesting than the Temple quests is indicative of the sort of person I am. It also says something about the main quest of Morrowind. The primary quest lines of Tribunal and Blood Moon pertain very little to the remainder of the content in their expansion. Your status in Raven Rock, or how much work you've done for Helseth, ultimately has no bearing on the world compared to the Nerevarine story. Most of the minor factions and storylines in Morrowind play some part in its main questline, perhaps a small part, but a part nonetheless. You could say there simply isn't enough material in Tribunal or Blood Moon for this to be the case, and I'd have to concede. Bethesda was more concerned on being a launch title for the 7th console generation than going all out on post-launch Morrowind content. For instance, there is an entire faction of raiders living in Solstheim that I didn't mention, and I know some people might have an issue with me not mentioning some of the more notable quests from Blood Moon, such as the Thirsk Mead Hall. Some of this content was the work of one Emil Pagliarulo, who got his start at Bethesda with this expansion working on side quests that include a reference to Timmy and the Well, Beowulf, and Cocaine Santa. Still, we're nearing the end of the conclusion of this series here, so I have to give some credit. Like Tribunal, Blood Moon features a great deal of unique voice acting. The ambition of having multiple paths, even if those multiple paths are centered around the same scripted events just in reverse, is still impressive. And so ends part oh shit, I forgot about the werewolves. Right. Werewolves get an additional quest for being cured of their disease. It starts with a rumor located near the dock at Fort Frostmoth, a common travel point on the island, so you're guaranteed to run into it. The note simply mentions that witches have come to Solstheim and have been spotted at the altar of Thrond. Sure enough, they have. A raven speaks with you offering to help cure your lycanthropy, which you can refuse. She'll set you on the right path, and even if you kill her, she'll drop a note detailing the ritual. First, we need to get a flower which grows atop the highest peak on the island. Then we find some ripened belladonna berries. Finally, we have to sacrifice an innocent Nord and take out her heart, cast a spell, and put the heart back in. The Nord will transform into a werewolf that, when killed, marks the end of our curse. From then on, the player's only option to be a werewolf will be Hircine's ring, which we recovered from Tharstan. However, because werewolves are weaker than high-level players, this is ultimately a novelty for role players and really not much else. So we're finally here. This has been a long time coming, both in runtime for first-time viewers and for the subscribers who've stuck it out since the beginning of the first parts. Originally, this was going to be my break, a quick little series on a game I know and love well, and then I would get back to trashing console games. I didn't anticipate how much of a time investment this project would become. What's funny is that at points it started to sound like I didn't like the game. That's because it's a lot easier to write negativity than positivity, and negativity sells. That's the sad fact of what I do. Is Morrowind patrician tier? Well, yeah. I mean, what have we been doing if it wasn't? If Bethesda had made a true sequel to Morrowind, improving on the formula instead of stripping components away to broaden appeal, then I probably wouldn't think so. In that timeline, Morrowind would have been a unique little oddity that paved the way to a generation of greater games. Instead, Morrowind is best symbolized by a Dwemer ruin, a sign of something that was once great that ultimately usurped itself, paving the way for lesser successors to come along and wonder, in between bouts of bashing each other over the head with their clubs, just what it was that made them so special, and why did they go away? The answer is more complicated than simply saying that Bethesda got greedy, that Bethesda kneecapped their vision for the sake of achieving the highest valuation possible for a future sale. When you hear Todd Howard talk about Morrowind, it means something special to him. That's because Bethesda came very close to the edge when making the game. Howard is a driven person. His persistence is what got him a job at Bethesda. His desire to improve the system made him a leader. He stole Julian LeFay's series and transformed it into one of the most recognizable gaming franchises. And he probably did it because he didn't want the employees under him to ever have to deal with what Bethesda of the late 90s and early aughts had to deal with. In a sense, a compromised vision is preferable to sustained crunch periods and the looming threat of failure leading to unemployment. I spent over a year working 70 to 100 hours a week, gained about 50 pounds, and had turned into an obnoxious vitamin D deficient zombie. My health and sanity were failing. I became someone I didn't like. Douglas Goodall.
We've been through, again, a lot of people here have done it for a long time. So we've been through every type of crunch you can imagine. And long ago, some ones that were very, very difficult for a lot of us, personally, and your time and your health and things like that.
So let's take this section by section. Morrowind's combat is clunky and awkward, but really, only in the beginning. It relays a true sense of progression to go from struggling to fight wildlife to one-shotting powerful foes on the hardest difficulty. But from an action perspective, it leaves a lot to be desired. This isn't a problem of mechanics, it's a problem of tuning. Tune the formula to make hits just a little more frequent. Each percentage more frequency is 10 critics who wouldn't have noticed the system in the first place. Morrowind's stealth is similarly badly tuned. Pickpocket's impossible, stealth difficult, and the one thing that worked about it, real-time lockpicking, was replaced with a minigame. Morrowind's magic system is amazing, as long as you're prepared to spend a lot of money training to unlock its full potential. Yet another problem that a variable in an equation being properly tuned might fix. Not having the time and resources to finish tuning the game is the source of all its faults. Are the vampires and abolitionists underwhelming? Well, there's not enough time to finish the content. Not enough options in the dialogue? Well, the writer had too much other work to finish before he could flesh that out. Is Red Mountain a mess? That's a cost-benefit analysis. How many players are even going to get that far? Better to nail the lead-in and have players interested in buying Oblivion than nail the conclusion and be a dead company. It's honestly amazing given the circumstances that we got a game as intricately woven as Morrowind. Every single questline has intersections and connections to other questlines, at least at the surface level. I've given plenty of examples in this video. Even the mechanics are woven together. Strength and endurance may be the hallmarks of a warrior, but then agility is important to hit stuff, and willpower helps with stamina management, and personality is important once you get back to town. And then suddenly players are growing and developing themselves in ways they didn't originally anticipate because maybe they want to get better with a new weapon, or use a new mechanic they originally thought they wouldn't like. I really don't have to explain this because it's the series' central mechanical conceit, the concept that your character isn't being ramrodded into a preset class, but rather developing in a freeform way. The game also presents a unique aesthetic. There's a reason my profile picture has always been a Morrowind character, even an abstract version. Something about the early 3D low polygon style of characters. It's not a beautiful aesthetic, it's rustic, reflecting the rough world of Vardenfell. It's why I'm always bothered to see people using mods that turn characters into dolls. Actually no, that's a pretty good metaphor for standing down the edges of Morrowind. Vardenfell has some pretty striking scenery as well. Mushroom trees are the obvious go-to. It would have been nice to see more lava in the open world, since everywhere it shows up looks really nice, but they couldn't really do angled liquid surfaces yet, so no flowing lava foyadas. They probably also decided against it since the foyadas tend to be central pathways around the island. Maybe at the start of the third act you could have had Red Mountain have a minor eruption and filled the foyadas again, making a sudden navigation obstacle for the player. Speaking of things Bethesda couldn't do yet, model levels of detail. Now, of any game, Morrowind was the game to do view distance fog, since most regions have a decent excuse for low visibility, like foggy shorelines and ashy wastelands. But it's hard to appreciate Red Mountain outside of the imagination when you can't see it. While the overworld adventure and sights that can be seen can be impressive, there's a lot left to be desired once you start to notice the repetition in interior design. Now, I'm not going to be a pleb and leave it at that. Morrowind's interiors are made up of many parts like Lego pieces that can be put together in a variety of combinations. The system was created like this because originally Morrowind was going to procedurally generate much of its world, but then Howard saw the workflow potential of having an easy system for designers to make content in. It's literally so easy a child me could use the complementary construction set that came on a disc with the game to make a dungeon or a house. Except for the scripter, that abomination can suck off a shotgun. Morrowind's storytelling is fascinating. It's a shame that the possibilities of a purely text-based system were squandered due, once again, to the nature of the game's development. What's interesting is you can very easily tell the divisions in writing responsibilities based on what quest you're playing. You can even tell if it's Rolston, Goodall, Nelson, or Howard writing the quest based on how they approached certain ideas. For instance, Rolston experimented heavily with using greetings and goodbyes in the Imperial Cult questline, and would also dramatically page break dialogue using the continue function. Goodall's quests were much simpler from a script perspective, but would intertwine characters and plots, which is one of the perks of having one guy writing so many questlines. Since Goodall was the writer of the Thieves, Fighters Guild, House Olahu, Morag Tong, and more, he could easily intersect all of them with a character like Orpheus Drin. That would also be possible if each faction had a different writer, provided there was a lead writer making those connections, something missing from the later games. That's why later factions felt like independent puzzle pieces rather than a connected pattern of storylines. Todd Howard was responsible for finishing the Imperial Legion. It suffers the most from that faction distinction problem, as the Imperial forts feel like isolated sections of the world. There is the odd crossover where you can tell Goodall made the quest, like the one to investigate the Ebony Smuggler from the House Olahu questline. But otherwise, I've already detailed the oddities of Howard's writing. What I haven't mentioned is that Howard is also responsible for the tutorial. That thing I praised heavily? Yeah, Todd Howard is the man behind it. I'm not sure if his part in that ends when you walk out the door of the census office, or if he is also responsible for the broader sight-and tutorial. Douglas Goodall did say that Mark Nelson was responsible for Fargoth. Mark Nelson is also responsible for the Daedra and Vampire quests. He used the least dialogue in traditional writing and used the most voice acting for his quests. Bill Burkham was apparently a tester who also did one of the better Fighters Guild quests. And speaking of old interviews, let's go over some promotional material. One of the reasons Mike the Liar jokes about multiplayer is the inordinate number of times Bethesda got asked if Morrowind was going to be multiplayer. When discussing guilds, Rolston says the Dark Brotherhood was going to be joinable, when actually quite the opposite ended up being the case. Actually, Rolston talks a pretty big game in this interview, despite the fact that the 10 to 15 promised factions hadn't even been written yet, given that their writer started at Bethesda 6 months after the interview. He also details a group of quests called the Grand Council Resolution quests, which sound like an awesome idea and are nowhere to be seen in the finished product. The area and even the NPCs for such an idea are all present in Ebonheart, but it never got made, likely because it was far too ambitious for what they were capable of. In another interview, he states that they are going to reveal the origin story of vampires, which wasn't true. Now, in fairness, Bethesda at the time were trying to sell the game to both gamers and purse holders, so it's not really that unreasonable for them to sell a big game. Howard also spends a lot of time explaining how combat was going to work, which is all present in the game. The chop/thrust system is in the game, and the reason I didn't talk about it is that it's completely and utterly irrelevant due to one factor they apparently didn't anticipate: that there was going to be an objectively best category for each weapon. There was even an option patched in to just use the best option for every swing. What's funny is that this isn't a bad idea. It works for Mordhau. They just decided it wasn't worth developing and dropped it. There's also this picture which floated around every promotional article. Let's just take a second to admire this. First, Magicka is called spell points, and it has a green bar while fatigue is blue. Player name is in the game at all times, naturally. Top right says the spell name as well as showing the icon. At least you can tell that's a picture of a guy walking on water. Bottom left says the cell name and has an auto map which isn't accurate to the area and actually gets reused in other screenshots. Bottom right is the inventory, which besides some quality passes is actually pretty much the same as in the release version. And the dialogue window. They certainly didn't advertise how much reading there was going to be. Services and persuasion are actually tabs in the release version, they're just more subdued. Shulky Ashunbabi is an NPC in the release version, and they are indeed a merchant in Nisus, although they didn't keep their gender. I'm not sure what building this is, it doesn't look like anything in the game. I mean, barring the actual merchant is a street vendor, this interior is way more complex than the Adobe structures in the base game. Very interesting. Overall, while the interviews are interesting and provided some insight on the development process, Howard and Rolston tended to keep their cards close to their chest when asked questions. They did expose on occasion that they were promising ahead of their development, but I wouldn't say there were outright lies and deceptions in Morrowind's marketing. Is Vivek visually much more complex than the promotional material? Yeah, and I've already explained why the original vision of Vivek wouldn't have worked back then. Morrowind even had a 6-month delay. It was originally supposed to be released in the winter of 2001, but got delayed to May of 2002, with Tribunal coming in November of 2002 and Blood Moon in June of 2003, and finally the Xbox Game of the Year edition in October of 2003. Tribunal and Blood Moon are interesting creatures in their own right. They represent a Bethesda still following the schema of Morrowind, but having learned lessons from the original game. They also feature some experimentation for ideas that would become part of the core design of Oblivion. But for reasons I'll explain when you're older, they learned the wrong lessons. So we've reached the end of this video. There's only one thing left to do. Near the start of the game, we found some scrolls called Icarian Flight that will throw you across the map. I figure it's fitting we step off the dock we helped to build and leap off into the horizon for a new adventure. This has been a long project, so forgive me for adding this little personal section at the end. For everyone who made it here, here's your reward. If you want, you can subscribe. This video isn't going to be standard on this channel. In fact, I'm not even entirely sure I'll never do another project as long as or in depth as this video. This really was a product of passion. I want to So it's basically illegal to release a 7-hour and 53-minute video on a game netting hundreds of thousands of views and not discuss its sequel. The subsection of that law emphasizes this in cases where the original video discussed problems with said sequel. I mean, I didn't write the law. Go read the Declaration of Independence if you don't believe me. So, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. The oft-maligned sequel to Morrowind and Daggerfall, which arguably marked the shift in design philosophy at Bethesda from role-playing game to action-adventure titles. I guess I should say before we get too deep into this that this isn't just going to be a bash session of Oblivion. Of course, someone will try and turn that on me the first time I do criticize the game because they misunderstood the important part of that sentence. I'm going to acknowledge what Oblivion does better than Morrowind, and I'm going to try and avoid spending an excessive amount of time on points where Bethesda has improved since Oblivion. There's no point, for instance, in going on a 30-minute tangent about the failures of FaceGen when later games implemented better systems for character creation. However, just because a later game did something better doesn't mean I shouldn't at least point out its presence in Oblivion. Because even though later games did improve character creation, the decision to implement FaceGen still reflects on the development of Oblivion. FaceGen is a middleware program for non-character artists to create faces, and at the time could at most be used for facial generation of characters where they wouldn't be the primary focus of the camera, example given being Tiger Woods' PGA Tour. It certainly wasn't meant to create thousands of unique, distinguishable character faces, or for those character faces to be plastered front and center for every single dialogue in the entire game. What this tells us about the development of Oblivion was that there simply wasn't time to either implement a better solution or to at least try and mitigate the damage the potato-faced freaks of Cyrodiil have caused the game's tone. With that in mind, it's clear that the decision to use FaceGen was one of time-saving in order to focus on more important elements. Thus, the goal of this video is simple: to demonstrate the impact the 2006 launch date and goal of being an early 7th generation console release had on the overall Elder Scrolls formula. Of course, did you really think you were going to get by one of my longer videos without one of my patented introductory argumentation segments? On screen is a timestamp. The timestamp will skip to the part of this introduction that pertains to Oblivion. However, before you click ahead, there's two things I want to mention. One is that if you plan on leaving a comment on this video, don't skip ahead. You'll be laughed at if you do. The Morrowind introduction did a good job of preventing both a bunch of embarrassing comments about the length as well as keeping the comments fresh by avoiding the common pitfalls of the usual Elder Scrolls discussion. 2 is that I never do this timestamp thing again. This is an audio-focused experience, and as such I try not to make any arguments that necessitate tabbing out of a game or unlocking your phone to check the screen. There will be additional visual information or examples you may miss, such as name spellings and character sheets or the odd visual gag, but it's otherwise unnecessary to keep me on your main screen. Weird thing is, right, despite these sections being easily skippable thanks to the super useful timestamp section feature on YouTube, people still like to complain about the Morrowind introduction, even though it was actually very successful at achieving my goal with its inclusion. I guess if I don't ring an alarm and point it out on screen, someone might miss the fact that you could just skip it. Okay, there, go where you will. On my last video, a great deal of the discourse in the comments was on my first point, where I spend 4.5 minutes discussing the length of the video, despite this section being quite literally less than 1% of the overall runtime. It's hard to directly criticize someone for making a long video or for watching one, because we're all adults here, and I have the data to prove that claim, by the way, but it did happen. I did not create this video for the express purpose of watching it in one sitting, or even for you to actively watch it. The focus is, as I said, on an audio-focused experience. You're free to play a game, maybe even an Elder Scrolls game, while listening. Much of the editing effort has gone into balancing the audio so as to avoid having to mess with the volume as much as possible. In addition, a lot of the writing effort went into structuring the script into sections. YouTube currently has a handy feature where the video is divided into timecode sections. If you don't see that, check for timestamps. They'll lead to the title cards between sections. Some people like to compare my Morrowind video to various films, which is unfair because in terms of structure, it's closer to a television show. If you can't spare X hours to watch this entire video, you'll find this video to be a lot closer to a bunch of episodes rather than a movie. In addition, the Morrowind video is not mandated watching for this video. I encourage you to watch it at some point if you haven't already, but you likely came here for Oblivion, and Oblivion is what I'll be discussing. If it's not, then I'll try to provide you some context. Something people did with the Morrowind video is leave comments timestamping where they left off in the video. So if you need to track your place, or are switching from mobile to desktop, or vice versa, that can help you as it usually shows your comment on top of the comment section after you leave it. The only thing I have to add to the length argument that I didn't say in the Morrowind video is that length is not a factor when I write my scripts. I don't aim for certain lengths and then stretch out the material. This isn't a college essay and my grade isn't tied to how many words I write. In fact, making these videos is much easier from an editing perspective the shorter they are. I write to the length necessary to cover the material. As of writing this, I have no idea how long this script will be, although when I edit this line, I'll probably have a better idea. When people ask me who the introduction is for, it's this guy. This guy assumes that because a video is long, that implies it has to be watched in a single sitting. Never assume just because you understand something implicitly, that means everybody else does as well. There are plenty of people who don't understand basic features about long-form content. Finally, in the description, you'll find a list of all the sources. I started taking sourcing seriously halfway through the Morrowind project, so it wasn't the best sourced video. This time, however, I'll be starting from the beginning. Every single interview, article, video, song, or hopefully image will be sourced to the best of my abilities. If you are the artist responsible and find I haven't sourced you, which will happen, feel free to reach out and I'll correct that. This is where I have to mention the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. They've been essential for my work and I consider them to be the gold standard for online wikis. Now, on to Oblivion. Why do Morrowind videos have to tear down Oblivion so much? It's just like Oblivion was better anyways, and that's proven by how successful you'd be. It's amazing how much of a Morrowind superfan and Morrowind super hater I am at the same time. Consider for a moment an alternate reality where you're seeing this video without any possible knowledge of my opinion on Morrowind. If that idea has changed your instinct about what to think I'm going to say in this video, then you should probably reconsider that comment. My goal is not to prove Oblivion is good or bad. There's no point to it. I don't make more money for it. I don't stake my identity on it. My goal is to analyze the series that I love in the interest that a developer, be they at Bethesda or at any studio, can take a piece of my passion and make a better game. Morrowind is a broken, dated game. Just because I like or praise it doesn't imply that I think it's perfection. In fact, I spent 8 hours talking about it. Do you think it was 8 hours of me saying I love Morrowind over and over like a mantra? Of course not. And I find it extremely annoying when people boil an entire video's worth of arguments down to some kind of misplaced loyalty, because that's not how normal people work. An immediate comparison that's going to be made is to Will Love's video game's own 5-hour retrospective of Oblivion. I know this because people already make the comparison with my Morrowind analysis. I think it's a good video, I applaud the effort. However, you probably can't find somebody I'm going to disagree with more on Oblivion. I watched this video while live posting on my Discord because I was only making it a couple minutes at a time before I'd have to pause due to some of the arguments Will makes. And I disagreed with him so heavily a few people thought I was going to make an entire video breaking down why he's wrong, which would be both mean-spirited and honestly a waste of time. If you're worried that this video is just going to be a repeat of his, I can guarantee it is not based on our stylistic differences. Instead, I'm going to use his video and others as examples. I don't mean ill will by this. Believe it or not, it's possible to disagree with somebody and not hate them. I fully expect the same to happen to me. This is all overstating the presence of these clips, however. We're giving 3 paragraphs to something that will be less than 1% of the video because it will be very easy for people to get the wrong impression because they decided to space out or skip this section. I mean, if you want proof that it's not mean-spirited, you should realize that me even including these clips is a sign that they at least tried to say something, compared to the myriad of Oblivion videos which say nothing and could have been written off in a bingo card of common topics. Be sure to grab your bingo card before watching my video. Another comparison will be to the more recent Private Sessions Oblivion video series. I was actually worried because I only saw this one after I'd finished the script. However, upon watching it, I was relieved to find that this too won't be an issue. Each contributor to the Oblivion long-form video subgenre has brought a unique perspective to the series. Another thing at some point is somebody's going to bring up a lore argument which is contingent on information gleaned from Elder Scrolls Online. Firstly, Michael Kirkbride wrote a story called Coda, which says I can pick and choose what games and mods are canon for me, and second, I haven't played ESO very much, but I have played enough to know that it breaks existing canon quite significantly, and it's fine if you're into it, but I'm not. So if we start talking about Mana Marco and you bring up that he was the villain of ESO, I cannot be compelled to care. I feel there may be some people whose knowledge of the lore comes exclusively from lore videos. That's okay, but lore videos make it difficult to distinguish what source a piece of information comes from. Example given, Umbra. Umbra is a sword created by a witch that has the power to steal souls. That's it. In Morrowind, a guy named himself after his sword Umbra, not because he was bewitched by it, but because his name was ultimately irrelevant. You might as well have called him by his sword's name due to violence being his life's accomplishment. That's it. Oblivion would change this canon to make the sword more malicious in its powers, and the novel Umbriel would change the canon further to elaborate that Clavicus Vile was involved in the creation of the sword. However, a future novel does not inform the narrative role Umbra plays in Oblivion. It's only reasonable to criticize Oblivion by the information that it provides and its prequels had provided. Time effectively stops at the date of release. But what about Skyrim lore? I extend a courtesy to Skyrim lore that I do not to other future lore sources, frankly, because I like Skyrim well enough to do so. In addition, Skyrim doesn't go crazy with the recontextualizations, and when it does, like with the skeleton key, I'll mention it and draw where the line is. You might say it's hypocritical to include Skyrim lore but not ESO lore, and the line is this. First of all, it's just video games, it's not that big a deal. Second, ESO likes nostalgia bait and loves recontextualization. Seriously, read a lore page about anything in Morrowind, Oblivion, or Skyrim, and you'll eventually see something from ESO. The thing is, Skyrim was an independent game. It loved its predecessors, and it made references to them, but it never really tried to change anything about Morrowind or Oblivion. Like, the most egregious thing in Skyrim is that you can wield Keening without Wraithguard and it doesn't immediately kill you. The number of people who are massive Morrowind fans that don't say Skyrim is non-canon says something about the respect that game had for its past stories. It's the same reason why Fallout 3, 4, and 76 wouldn't come up in a discussion of Fallout 1 and 2, but New Vegas would. Now, this may sound odd, but there are no fast travel services at Telfir. The character you see on screen does not exist. Despite stating this objective fact, there are people in the comment section of my Morrowind video who have claimed to the contrary. They're technically correct in that they do indeed remember there being a boat captain at Telfir. So how can this be? The problem here is the Morrowind Patch Project, which for a spell was the popular option for patching Morrowind of its major bugs. However, it's also fairly controversial as the patch attempts to balance aspects of the game and fix things that arguably weren't broken in the first place. One of those fixes being the re-addition of Senia Yurdius to the game. The reason I believe she was cut is due to one of the earlier Telvanni quests where you're dispatched to deliver a letter to Divith Fear, and are given several implements of getting to the island by foot, implying that the writer intended for the quest to not have a means of easily getting to Tel Fear. The conflict is easy to see once you realize that Divith Fear was the creation of Ken Rolston, and Hell's Telvanni was the creation of Douglas Goodall. Rolston likely added Senia to the game as the main quest was written first, and Goodall likely removed her when he later wrote House Telvanni. This is relevant as this video is using several patches. I originally imagined this series would be played unpatched, to review as accurately a version to the game to Bethesda's intentions as possible. But one look at the UESP page on fixes by the unofficial Oblivion patch has swayed that decision, simply from a production standpoint. Plus, unlike Morrowind, I'm not going to play an unideal version simply to prove a point. You cannot drop Nirnroot in Oblivion. Like Senia Yurdius, people are going to disagree with that statement, as they'll have clear memories of being able to drop Nirnroot, which is an addition of the unofficial Oblivion patch. Nirnroot in the base game is a quest item, and thus cannot be dropped until the related Nirnroot quest is finished. If I say something that you remember being different, it's possible that is because we are not technically talking about the same game. Given the immensity of material we have to go over, I can't account for all of these minor discrepancies. So I simply ask you to consider that fact before calling me out. A few other mods were used as well. A mod to prevent some crashes, not that it entirely worked. A mod to maintain a higher field of view without having to type the command every 5 minutes. And a mod that allows me to have a high but capped frame rate with borderless full screen. The first and third mods are to help with the recording, while the second mod is both for my benefit as a player and your benefit as a viewer. So now let's talk about why I don't use other mods. Sure, plenty of issues that I'm going to bring up can potentially be fixed with a mod, but I think that modifying mechanics or design effectively invalidates any arguments I can make. Because at what point am I criticizing the designers at Bethesda, and at what point am I criticizing the mod authors? I have to speak to the version of the game that Bethesda created. The unofficial patch resolves a lot of issues still in the game, but I think it bears mentioning that I don't really think it's alright for that many issues to still be present. And most of these issues can be sidestepped by playing exact ways around certain problems. I used it anyways more so as insurance that I would be able to complete my playthrough with as little console interference as possible, and even that wasn't a guarantee. My mod setup is akin to playing OpenMW. I don't see an issue with reviewers using source ports of Doom 2 as long as the source port's faithful to the original vision. Sure, using a mod to fix the leveling system could make my experience better, but this isn't a Let's Play or livestream channel, this is analysis. If something's so awful that it requires me to go out of my way to track down a modification, install it, and make sure it doesn't conflict with other modifications, then that's an issue worth commenting on, isn't it? More to the point, doing such an analysis would be feeding into the complacency of modern Bethesda, who can release broken game after broken game with the expectation that the community will step in, fix the game for them, and then thank them for the opportunity to do so, after having paid full price for the game and whatever DLCs attached. I mean, have you tried playing Fallout 3 without fan patches lately? The game doesn't even start on Windows 10. Before you say that compatibility changes over time, Morrowind and Oblivion still run out of the box on Windows 10. I do like the modding community, and maybe one day I'll do a video where I do a super modded playthrough to showcase their work, but that day isn't today. We're talking about Oblivion, the game that was created by Bethesda. Thanks to the UESP, they've cataloged many of the issues that can occur if you don't have the unofficial patch installed, which should be handy in discussing problems I didn't personally experience because of the patch, which are still in the game despite the several official patches that did happen. This is a continuation of our Morrowind character, specifically our character from the main quest. Unfortunately for the Nerevarine, a mix-up at the East Empire Company means all those crimes committed by Umbra got pinned on him instead. That 300,000 gold bounty translates roughly to an 8-year prison sentence in Tamrielic law, of which he's currently served 6 years since the end of Blood Moon. 6 years in the Imperial City Rehabilitation and Corrections Facility. Since each day represents a skill point lost, our skills were reset back to default again. The only reason this was allowed was that the Nerevarine's lawyer forgot to take his Fortify Intelligence potion that morning and did such a horrific job at legal defense he was also thrown in prison in the cell across from his client. Now, while it's fun to pretend that each Elder Scrolls protagonist is the same character, they can't and really shouldn't be. This is mostly just a way of saying I'm playing the same Breton battle mage born under the Atronax sign again, with the class currently on screen. Yes, that is an abomination, and yes, I will talk about why it is the way it is. I'm also not going to be playing multiple characters like I did in my Morrowind video. There are several reasons for this decision, ranging from the fact that you really don't need to the fact that you really shouldn't. This game is a complicated tapestry, and fully appreciating its higher levels requires a single character. For now, let's discuss Oblivion's introduction. It starts with a word from Captain Picard about his imminent death and how that will lead to the destruction of life on Tamriel. This is a tad more active than the prophecy stuff presented in Morrowind, which was largely written off by the first character you meet as a dream. Azura in that cutscene mostly just says that you've been chosen for some unspecified task and then you wake up. Here, Professor Xavier tells us how urgent the situation is and then shows us the consequences for ignoring it. Write that down, it's important later. After that, we create our character, which can range from hilarious Shrek monster to an approximation of the human form. The faults of Oblivion's face gen are fairly self-evident. However, it's important to remember that the goofier faces you encounter are a consequence of them being intentionally created that way, and not necessarily just because face gen itself is faulty. The game basically just packages the same exact tools the designer had for character creation with a fancy UI. Regardless, once you have your creature ready, your deposit